Bom dia a todos. Bom dia. Fico vendo muita gente, mas estamos aguardando que este auditório encha, não é? Porque realmente é um prazer ter este simpósio, que é muito importante para o momento que estamos vivendo na saúde e na atualidade aqui no Brasil. Cumprimento naturalmente o nosso coordenador de pesquisa do San Rafael, o Dr. Luiz Correia, ao qual agradeço muito também a oportunidade de ter conosco o professor Franz Polsner-Olt, ao qual damos as boas-vindas e com certeza vai nos enriquecer com os seus conhecimentos e a sua humanidade. É incrível, nas duas palavras que trocamos antes de entrar no auditório, a formação dele humanística e científica junta. É uma coisa realmente importante e enriquecedora mesmo. O tema é de grande atualidade, no intuito de aumentar as probabilidades de benefícios à saúde e particularmente ao paciente, através das evidências de provada eficácia, baseadas em pesquisa científica em boas práticas clínicas. Nisso, o professor tem uma grande experiência e pode passar para nós realmente indicações valiosas. O Hospital San Rafael constitui um campo aberto às boas práticas e a medicina praticada no nosso hospital não pode distanciar-se de uma séria investigação científica, assim como do empenho de curar a pessoa como um todo, como um único biopsicoespiritual, com metodologia sempre na vanguarda e no uso criterioso dos recursos e da tecnologia, que resultem naturalmente em eficácia, qualidade, segurança e eficiência também, e, por fim, também são fatores de economia. Economia em todos os sentidos, bem amplos, e será este o tema principal do nosso professor. Somos instigados pela filosofia da instituição e do nosso fundador, Dom Luigi, que assim resumia: a investigação é apaixonante porque estimula o ser humano na potencialidade do seu diferencial, a inteligência, e naturalmente voltada para o bem do paciente e de todos e de todo o que são os seres humanos. Sucesso, e aproveitem, se enriqueçam dessa oportunidade de ter aqui o nosso professor Franz.
Obrigado, dona Laura. Bom dia a todos. Agradeço a dona Laura as palavras, a doutora Liliana e a Alfredo por ter recebido meu amigo Franz Porchoit tão bem aqui no hospital. Agradeço a vocês a presença para essa manhã de discussão, muito mais discussão do que de aulas. A gente tem o privilégio de ter Franz Porchoit, é alemão, ele é professor da Universidade de Ulm, originalmente oncologista e hematologista, aposentado da atividade clínica e hoje em dia trabalha mais em ensino e pesquisa de medicina baseada em evidência e economia clínica. A gente tem o privilégio de ter ele hoje aqui e as três apresentações dele trarão três conceitos originais, no sentido que foi ele que inventou. A gente está aqui tendo o criador de três formas de pensar, três expressões. Uma é a segurança perceptível, que a gente vem inclusive discutindo aqui, dentro do tema Choosing Wisely, e essa ideia da segurança perceptível foi a criação de Franz. O outro tópico que ele vai falar aqui é sobre economia clínica. E vocês vão ver que a economia clínica, da forma como ele criou, não é algo que tem relação necessariamente monetária, é diferente de economia e saúde, custo-efetividade, etc. Na realidade, é uma outra perspectiva de raciocínio clínico que também foi criação dele. E a terceira fala dele vai ser sobre a ideia do why nurse, que é uma enfermeira que sempre pergunta ao médico por que você está fazendo isso. Então, a gente tem três conceitos aqui, criações de Franz já publicados, que a gente vai ter o privilégio de discutir isso com ele. E isso vai ser intercalado com duas participações minhas também, porque isso é parte, a gente está trazendo aqui para o nosso grupo, no Hospital São Rafael, para vocês, coisas que eu venho discutindo com Franz ao longo desse período de colaboração. Então, eu vou também ter 2 participações, no sentido de a gente discutir junto essas ideias. Se vocês olharem no programa, existe 20 minutos de fala, seguido de 10 minutos de discussão, o que dá 30 minutos para cada tópico. Mas, na realidade, a gente não quer que seja assim, 20 minutos de fala e 10 de discussão. A gente quer que seja 30 minutos de discussão. Então, vocês vão perceber que, enquanto ele estiver falando, eu vou interromper ele. E vou provocar, e eu quero que vocês façam o mesmo com ele e comigo, de forma que fique 30 minutos de discussão ao invés dessa questão. Outra coisa que eu tenho que dizer também é sobre o idioma, né? Eu estou falando em português com vocês, mas ele precisa entender um pouco o que eu estou falando. Então, em determinados momentos, na hora que eu estiver falando com ele, com vocês, eu mesmo vou falar em inglês. E ele vai dar as palestras, obviamente, em inglês. Mas vocês vão ver que o inglês dele é o inglês mais fácil que eu conheço de ser entendido. Mais fácil, inclusive, do que o meu. Né? Então, não vai ter grande problema de comunicação. A gente vai misturar, ao longo dessa manhã, o inglês com o português de uma maneira que representa o quanto o Hospital São Rafael é um hospital internacionalizado. Essa é uma das nossas intenções. Vocês vão ver que os meus slides vão estar em inglês para ele entender mais ou menos o que eu estou falando, mas eu vou falar em português e ele vai falar em inglês. Então, vocês também ficam à vontade para fazer comentários e perguntas em inglês ou português. Se vocês fizerem em português, eu vou traduzir para ele. Se fizer em inglês, melhor ainda. Ok? Então, eu espero que a gente tenha uma manhã reflexiva, porque se vocês verem aqui, Franz tem esse Institute of Clinical Economics e o termo aqui é lateral thinking. Pensamento lateral. Pensamento lateral é alguma coisa que a gente pode traduzir também como fora da caixa. Não é o que está aqui dentro, é o que está ao lado. Então, sempre uma forma alternativa de pensar é o que a gente quer. Com essa missão científica nossa, sempre está promovendo o pensamento científico aliado à qualidade assistencial. Tem muito também aqui a ver essa fala com qualidade. E eu espero que o pessoal da qualidade também esteja aí, ok? Então, so I presented yourself as a lateral thinking person and the one who invented the 3 concepts you are going to speak. So it's a privilege. And I explained you are going to speak in English, but your English is very easy to understand. So, a primeira palestra dele é sobre segurança perceptível e as implicações disso em termos das nossas atitudes clínicas. Franz, please, this is your time now.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank the board of directors to invite me to this hospital, and I appreciate it very much because I have learned a lot about you by talking to Luis Correa when he was in Ulm, and we were sitting together 3 weeks, for 3 weeks, every day. And he always had to tell me various stories, various interesting stories. So I decided I should come here to see this place and to offer some lectures. Now this became true now, and I came here, and I will start with my first lecture about the implication of perceived safety. Actually, the perceived safety story started in Bavaria with a beer and a Lufthansa pilot. The Lufthansa pilot and myself, we were invited to give a lecture. And the Lufthansa pilot had to talk about team abilities, so the cooperation of a team, you know, in an airplane. And I had to talk about evidence-based medicine. And in the evening, we were sitting together, and I asked him, what can I, as a doctor, learn from you as a pilot, and vice versa? And he's a typical Bavarian. He said, nothing. nothing. Because he wants to have his quiet, his peace, and just to get a beer, to enjoy the beer. Then I said, no, this is not the way to get out of this story. Please tell me, you were talking about safety. What kind of safety measures do you have in your airplane? And then he said, you know, the life jacket under the seat. And I said, now let's connect it with evidence-based medicine. How many lives did you save in your airplane with the life jacket? And he said, 0. And then I concluded, you know, this doesn't make sense to have life jackets in an airplane without saving any life. And I asked him, why don't you kick it out, all these life jackets? And he said, oh, don't tell me this. There will be 8 organizations. They will cause you enormous trouble when you come up with this idea. So I was very dissatisfied because I thought this was a very good idea, you know, to kick out all these useless life jackets. And then I discussed this concept together with my students back home, and my students said, no. It makes sense. Because there is something like perceived safety. You know, safety you can feel. And this must be different from reality. And this was the origin of a long story. And I had 3 doctoral fellows who wrote their thesis on perceived safety. And the first one was a pharmacist. And she wrote a doctoral thesis on perceived safety of readers of a drug package leaflet, information leaflet. You know, these little pieces of information which are in each of the drug packages. So it became a very interesting story. And now I will tell you a little bit about the further development of this story. So this is the outline. Safety is a basic human need. Most patients' decisions include safety. Safety is not always risk reduction. Communication strongly influences safety. And then we make a final conclusion. So the first one, safety is a basic human need. Maybe you have seen this pyramid, and this is the description of human needs. It stems from 1940-45, and it says the very basic needs are physiological needs like a roof on top of your head, basic food, sleep. And then as a next one comes safety and security. And all the other ones are not as important. So you see, safety is really one of the basic human needs. And you will be surprised when you think about safety, how often you will observe that safety plays an important role in your life as a doctor and in the life of patients. You know, when I talk to my colleagues, they often complain about too much diagnostic. You know what the reason is of too much diagnosis? The doctor wants to be safe. He doesn't think that making more diagnosis creates more problems. I do not have the time today to explain this, but we worked on this, and we came to the conclusion that making overdiagnosis, making too much diagnosis, causes a horrible amount of problems. And it's absolutely worthwhile to think about what is the appropriate number of tests that have to be done in a particular patient. You see, this was Abraham Maslow, it was 1943, who described this, and here is the original reference. So I will talk about the safety loop. This is the most recent development, about after 10 years. I will make a jump of 10 years. This safety loop was described, our group described this safety loop only 2 years ago. And I will here just explain what it is, and afterwards I will show you the safety loop. The safety loop illustrates the association and the mutual influence of an objective risk described by the product of, so this is the objective risk, incidence of damage times size of the damage. So when we talk about risks, we have an objective measure. This is incidence times the size of the damage. And by the subjective perception of this objective risk, described by the quality and quantity of perceived safety. So the first thing you learn here in this lecture is safety is nothing else as the subjective perception of an objective measure. The objective measure is risk, and safety is a subjective measure. You probably remember that when we use the word safety, we always think that safety is something objective. You know, the German government, they offered a huge amount of money to find out how much police and how many dogs and how many tanks do we have to protect Frankfurt Airport. You know, to provide the optimal safety. Nobody at that time was thinking about the fact that safety is a perception. And when they have to describe the risk of an attack to the Frankfurt Airport, they are in a trouble, because nobody can tell you what is the incidence. You may describe the damage. It's a lot of damage. People can die and so on. But it's extremely difficult and maybe even impossible to describe the incidence. How many damages do you have to expect in 10 or in 100 years?
So, Franz, according to what you're saying, safety is more like a feeling. Safety is not the opposite of risk.
Absolutely.
Safety is more like the feeling we have towards risk, right?
Yeah. And
we usually don't think this way, right?
No, nobody
we
thinks.
mix things like as if safety was the contrary of risk, but it's more
Absolutely.
like a feeling.
It's not. So, and now when you think by yourself, when safety is a subjective perception, you can imagine that this subjective perception is different in you and in your neighbor and in your friend, in anybody else. And this subjective perception depends on many factors. Do you have an idea what the most important factor is? Any guess? I expect somebody to say, information. Information is the most important factor. And this is the reason why I come to a hospital to tell this story in a hospital and not to an insurance company. Because in a hospital, you provide thousands of information. And to be honest, do you always think, what is the effect of my information to the patient? When I do not use very carefully select the words I use in the conversation with my patient, you may induce a lot of trouble and sometimes even harm.
We recently discussed here about transparency and be very transparent to patient. That we have to tell the patient everything that of almost risk. They experimented. They didn't have the feeling of risk, but there was almost some kind of side effects, and you have to tell. Maybe it's not such a good idea because it can decrease safety, right? You have to, maybe transparency has to be a little bit selected, right?
Yeah, of course. You know, you have to observe the values. First of all, you have to be honest to your patient. You know, that's the first principle. The second principle is you have to be transparent. But you also have to consider not to generate any harm to the patient. You know, and when you tell them the wrong words or the wrong information, you may really harm the patient. So I think it's beyond the ability of this lecture, but maybe we can talk later about this. So let me just continue. Of this objective described by the quality perceived safety. Factors that influence the subjective perception of an objective risk. Now, here is the safety loop. And I will give you an example. Imagine you are not in Salvador, but you are in the Alps, in the Italian Alps. And in the Italian Alps, there it's cold. And sometimes it's freezing. And when it's freezing, you have slippery streets. So on the radio, you get the news, be careful this morning. We have temperature below 0. So the streets may be slippery when you have to go to your hospital or you have an important date. Take care to drive carefully. So this is the information about the risk. The next step is you discuss this risk. So there will be risk communication. And you try to discuss several possibilities. Because you have a very important meeting at the hospital, so you should hurry to go there. But on the other hand, you know, the spokesman in the radio said, oh, it's quite dangerous to be too fast on your way. So there is some kind of risk communication, and this risk communication forms your perception of the risk. Of course, your personality plays also a certain role. The different people with different personalities, when they get exactly the same information, may come up with a different conclusion. So what happens here is you form the subjective perception of this objective risk. Now comes something very interesting. The interesting thing is that decision you make to drive carefully or to drive fast depends on your subjective perception. Do you see? You will not derive your decision from an objective risk, but the decision you make is derived from your subjective perception. And then comes an even worse argument, and this is the decision you made to drive carefully or to drive fast will influence the objective risk. I think the explanation in this little story is absolutely plausible. But you know, you should take this message to take home to think about your doctor-patient encounter or your nurse-patient encounter, and you will find hundreds of situations where you have to conclude this is really a balanced decision between doctor and the patient.
Franz, do you think, go back, do you think we usually, when you have the perceived safety, it overestimates risk or underestimate the risk, usually?
Thank you very much. This is an important question. The answer to this question is it is not predictable. You have to see the exact data and the specific scenarios. I have seen tables where people dramatically overestimate risks and other risks are dramatically underestimated. So you have to know the specific scenario, and of course, the personality plays also a role, and the information. So it's a very complex situation.
So ideally, we should not try not to underestimate or overestimate, to have the right balance, right?
Yeah, but how can you do this?
I don't know.
That's quite a tricky story. So, again, the safety loop illustrates. The safety loop illustrates the association of the mutual. Oh, sorry, I went the wrong way. Here we go. Risk-induced communication. The communication influences the subjective perception of the risk, and the subjective perception of the risk supports your decision, and your decision influences the objective risk. This was the cycle described in other words. And this arrow means this is the place where you can influence it. And this is the place where the most powerful influence comes. And the most powerful influence of this circle is information.
And the theme, every year, we have a meeting every month that is medicine and religion. Padre Bento is the one who organizes this, and the theme for this year is communication. This is the theme for the whole month discussion.
It came to my mind during the last year or during the last 2 years that communication is such an important matter in medicine, completely underestimated. So I will show you in the next lecture. I will show you some experimental designs and results how important communication is. So let's hurry up to come in a time deficit. Conclusion of my first lecture is communication drives the safety loop. Communication is the inducer of safety. Safety influences both the patient's decision and the risk of patients, and the power of communication is underestimated. It can induce benefit as well as harm. Thank you very much for your attention.
So, agora vocês podem... Tem 2 microfones aí. Edna está com 2 microfones na mão para quem quiser falar. Roberto Salponic quer falar ali. He is the head of pediatrics here. Very bright guy. He's this one. He's the head of pediatrics.
Thank you for your presentation. First of all, don't you think that commitment is more important than information? Because when you get commitment, you try to find the information necessary to do the things. Maybe if you do not have commitment, the information you use for nothing. Maybe commitment, compromisso is more important.
Commitment. Yeah. He's asking about commitment.
It's more important than information.
He's asking if commitment is the one who the characteristic who is most important. Commitment more important than information. Compromise, commitment.
And the other thing I want to ask you is about the feeling of unsafety that you have all around the world. You are in a market in Berlin, and you have a car that crashed all the people. You think that this feeling of unsafety all around the world will change the way you act at the hospital?
Did you understand? He mentions terrorism. So this feeling of safety we are having because several terrorist attacks, do you think it influences our perceived safety in the hospital?
Yeah, of course. I think it should work. Yeah. Of course, this influences the perceived safety in a hospital. But there are several different situations. For instance, we investigated the perceived safety of school children when somebody comes with a cannon, you know, and shoots people and teachers, you know, and we had a project on that, and we found out in the little kids, this type of intervention does not influence the perceived safety at all. It's much more important to have the mama at home when they come home from school, or to have somebody to talk to, or they have a teacher during the school breaks that their schoolmate will not take away the bread, you know, or the apples, or the relationship between the kids and the teacher is absolutely important for them, much more important than such an event where somebody comes to school.
So the answer to Roberto is that maybe in the hospital there are more other things that influences more the perceived safety than the thing we are living around the world, this news.
We did a study, of course, in a hospital, you know, and we got results. For instance, when you have rooms that are not clean, or you have machines which are not in order, are not properly function, this has a dramatic influence on the perception of safety from the patient, but also the tone, how the doctor would speak to the patient, or how the nurse would speak to the patient, the availability. There are so many factors, and you can test this all in a very scientific way and weight these factors and calculate the power of these factors. But, you know, I think the information you give is a variable you can change. You know, to change a personality, a little bit more difficult. When the equipment of the hospital is old, it's not too easy to change. You can do it. But what you can change right away is to teach people how important safety is, and they should approach the patient in a different way. Of course, behavior, commitment, and so on, and the words.
According to the safety loop, perceived safety would influence the outcome, right?
Definitely.
So we have to be worried not only with decreasing risk, but also to give a sense of safety to the patient, right? Not only to, you know, attitudes to avoid adverse events, but also attitudes to give safety, to give the perception of safety, because it may influence the outcome, right?
I will show you in the next lecture that the outcome will be completely different when the patient gets a doctor's decision according to his expectation, or against the patient's expectation. So this makes a tremendous difference.
Let me translate a little bit. Dr. Haroldo has a question, comment, but first I will translate a little bit. Eu vou traduzir um pouquinho a ideia principal que foi dita aqui, que seria a sensação de segurança. A segurança perceptiva é muito mais uma sensação do que uma ausência de risco. Então, a gente deve se preocupar tanto com, digamos, atitudes para diminuir risco e eventos adversos com pacientes, mas também com atitudes para gerar a percepção de segurança. Porque gerando a percepção de segurança, isso pode influenciar positivamente o desfecho do paciente também. Então, essa é a justificativa de, no avião, como ele começou a falar, de ter os coletes salva-vidas. Porque, apesar do colete salva-vida não salvar vidas, a presença do colete no avião dá a segurança de percepção que é importante para aquelas pessoas que estão na cabine do avião. Talvez um pânico a cada voo pudesse gerar consequências negativas. Então, essa é a sensação da importância, e eu tenho a impressão que isso não se fala muito quando a gente fala de segurança. Segurança seria o oposto do risco, mas, na verdade, segurança é um sentimento que a gente tem que proporcionar ao paciente, também como medida de qualidade. Dr. Haroldo is the head of neurology, and he has a comment.
Do you agree that of communication is the main reason for medical error? I mean, for wrong diagnosis, like that, at least in the hospital. Do you agree? Do you agree? Excuse me. do you agree that lack of communication is the main reason for
Medical error.
medical error?
I mean, it depends what you understand by doctor-patient communication. Of course, you know, I was educated in the way that the anamnesis, you know, taking the patient history, is one of the most important things we have to do as doctors. So usually we don't take the time to take a good medical history. I have a friend at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. I was his advisor, one of the professors, and they told me that they are using 90 to 120 minutes only for the first visit, because in Mayo, people are coming from all over the world, and they stay there for 2 or 3 days. And within 2 or 3 days, everything has to be done. You have to take the history, you have to do the optimal diagnosis. It costs a horrible amount of money. But they are very careful not to do an overdiagnosis. And for that, you have to have an optimal medical history. Do you think about this one?
Yeah, but how about the communication between doctors, between physicians, you see, in the hospital?
Oh, you mean among physicians? Yeah,
Among
this is another
physicians.
problem.
Among physicians.
This
That's
is
right.
another problem. I absolutely agree. The communication between doctors is a disaster sometimes. Yeah, it's not only that they communicate false information. They don't communicate the important information. They communicate misleading information. So there is a whole culture. And on the other side, you know, we have a radiology. Sorry about, are there radiologists here? You know, close your ears, you know. So the radiologists in our department, you know, they send back when I request a chest x-ray and there is no information on it, then they send back the request and they say, oh, you have to write down, you know, on the right-hand side or on the left-hand side, and what do you expect? Then I write down what I expect, and then he calls again. You know, did you do an auscultation in this patient? Did you hear anything by using your stethoscope? And what did you hear? You know, when he has all this information, it's on the left-hand side, it's in the upper half, you know, and you hear a sound like in an emerging pneumonia, you know, then it's not a big art, you know,
So
to conclude
it's
this
not-
patient has pneumonia.
It's not the report of the X-ray anymore.
No,
It's
no,
not.
he reports what the information he got from the ward.
Yeah, he's just doing a confirmation bias
Yeah.
of the previous probability of disease. It's no incremental information, right?
He works with a completely wrong likelihood ratio.
Yeah.
You know?
So Guilherme is a resident of radiology. He has a question.
Professor, thank you for your lecture. I have written my question because my English is terrible. We have two concepts that influence in the decision making, right? So we, for example, the disease modifier drug for rheumatoid arthritis. We have, for example, so we have an excellent medication for the disease, but we have serious side effects that accompany the drug, right? So how we can improve the communication to this patient so he can take the medication even with the side effects coming with the drug? So how can we
You
improve?
have a treatment with a lot of side effects. Yeah. How do we communicate this with the patient? You know, to talk about the side effects and the beneficial effects.
Yes, right.
How do we balance the communication?
What type of tips you can say to us?
A pergunta de Guilherme é, quando você tem uma situação que tem muitos efeitos adversos e um benefício, como comunicar isso com o paciente?
You know that the big problem is the perspective. You know what the perspective is? The perspective is the meaning of the individual person who talks to the patient. So imagine we are talking about a new surgical procedure, and the surgeon is very much interested to do this procedure in this patient. So he will talk about side effects, but you know, he will tell them, oh, there are almost no side effects, you know, and it's a very safe procedure, and I strongly recommend to do this.
You know, I have him, he's a cardiac surgeon. Very good cardiac surgeon. Well, I have the cardiology residents here, and she is the chief of cardiology. And we live this every day because we have to communicate to the. You know, cardiac surgery is a high-risk procedure. It's a very suffering procedure. So we have to communicate to the patient the risk and the beneficial effect.
Exactly.
So it's very tough. We tend to overestimate the beneficial effect and underestimate the risk.
Yeah.
I have this sense.
So the only chance, you know, a surgeon will be a surgeon will be a surgeon. You cannot change this person. No, the same with internists. You know, internist will be an internist, period. So the only thing you can do is take a second person with a different perspective and ask them to make a team recommendation, you know. Because the second person has a different perspective and he values the side effects maybe completely different from the first person. You know, and you will, I will give some talk about that.
We're coming closer to the white nurse concept.
Exactly.
Então, quando a gente tem a situação, que foi a pergunta de Guilherme, eu exemplifiquei também com cirurgia cardíaca, eu vi Eduardo ali e me lembrei, é a situação talvez que ele coloca ter uma pessoa mais independente ajudando nessa comunicação, né? Jaime, this guy, he is a strategic planning he's a planner, strategic planner of the hospital. You know, he's a philosopher too, so he must have a question regarding this.
I hope I can answer the question.
So, Dr. Franz, thank you for your lecture. I suppose the main problem of the communication is the illusion that the information inside the communication was understood by everyone. The illusion, a ilusão. What do you think about this?
Ilusão
de ter sido entendida por todo mundo.
Oh, okay. People who are communicating have the illusion that they are being understood. Yeah. And sometimes it's an illusion.
Yeah.
We think that people are understanding us, and actually it's not true. How to deal with this?
Yeah. This is, you know, actually I was involved for 20 years in quality of life research. So I know exactly this problem. When we translate, for instance, a quality of life questionnaire into a different language, where the perception is different, it's amazing what differences can come out. So, you know, how can we find out this? How can we eliminate this problem? The person who thinks he is understood by the patient does not realize that the patient understands something completely different. So, and usually the doctor is under a time pressure, so he never takes the time to talk to the patient. If he would talk to the patient, then he will realize, oh my gosh, he misunderstands the whole story. I have to start from the beginning. But most of the time, to be honest, the doctors are under considerable pressure and don't have the time to talk about this. So it's a question of management. It's a question of management to provide more time. And I would love to do an experiment, you know, a comparative experiment where we give the doctors more time and usual time. And then we see how many mistakes they do and how much it would cost when they order useless tests, they start useless treatments. Maybe it's even better to give the doctor more time to do a good anamnesis. At the end of the day, it's an economic difference.
Marcia is she's a nephrologist in the hospital. She's going to speak in Portuguese and I will translate. With the microphone. Com o microfone para todo mundo ouvir. Não é só
português mesmo. É um tema extremamente interessante, porque a percepção é uma coisa muito individual. E o seu público ele é muito diversificado. Mas eu vou voltar para aquela última frase do slide, que diz: o poder de comunicação é subestimado, que pode induzir um benefício e prejuízo. O que ele quis dizer com induzir benefício? A subestimação da comunicação.
Não, aqui é assim, a gente subestima o poder que a comunicação tem. A gente não dá à comunicação o poder que ela de fato tem. Então, a gente não se preocupa tanto com a comunicação. E isso pode provocar tanto malefício e o benefício se você se preocupar com a comunicação.
Eu extrapolei ainda mais a minha interpretação assim. Alguns médicos ainda têm a cultura de que a informação demais pode trazer prejuízo.
Ok.
Né? Eu queria ver se, na experiência dele, mundo afora, como é essa convivência entre essa informação demais. Ainda existe isso culturalmente aqui no Brasil. Você informar demais, às vezes, traz prejuízo. O doente fica, às vezes, muito inseguro por ter tanta informação.
Okay.
Né?
She's asking about too much information. She has the sense that sometimes if we give too much information, it decreases perceived safety. Do you agree with this?
Absolutely. I agree absolutely with you. You know, I had a very clever boss. My boss was head of hematology. Actually, I was trained as hematologist and medical oncologist. So, you know, I will tell you later this story. But come back to your question. My boss suggested when we see a patient the first time, we try to find out, does the patient want full information or does the patient want only the most important? So you cannot ask the question, do you want to get full information or only half the information? That's nonsense. But you have to develop the feeling during the first conversation. This is a patient who can hardly cope with the entire truth. And I strongly recommend to make a remark in the patient record when you see the patient the first time. Because this is important for somebody in the night shift. He does not know the patient. And when you make a standard way of reporting this, you know, on the first day where you do take the anamnesis, at the end of the anamnesis there is a statement, this patient wants to know the entire truth, everything. Then the other guy is much better off. You agree probably?
Então, traduzindo um pouco, não existe uma forma padronizada. Ele diz que no primeiro contato a gente tem que ter esse feeling, né, do quanto o paciente quer realmente saber das coisas ou não, e que eu achei bem very interesting your idea to write this in the chart, escrever no prontuário bem grande qual o grau de desejo que o paciente tem e está participando tanto dessas decisões. Tudo é sobre o bem-estar e a satisfação do paciente.
Porque tem realmente paciente que você percebe que ele sabe, mas não quer veladamente ser dito aquilo.
Okay.
Thank you.
More questions? Márcio, you have a question? Ana Verena, you have a comment? Okay. So, okay. Jorge Cardoso, he is the head of engineering, hospital engineering of the hospital.
I'm mechatronic and clinical engineer. When you started your lecture, you gave us as example of perceived safety, the life vexed, okay? But my question is, instead, in the beginning of the flight, instead of informing to passengers that you have under your seat the life vest. The flight attendant informed you have a completely report of maintenance with all technical dates. Do you believe that the passenger will accept this change, the life vest, as a symbol of perceived safe for one technical report with information that the passenger don't understand?
He considers a symbol the
he's
life.
asking, instead of making the whole story about the life vest in the beginning of the flight before taking off, shouldn't the pilot say, well, this airplane was very well maintained and has all the reports regarding safety? Which one would be, generate more perceived safety, in your opinion? And how do you compare this with a hospital situation?
But our flight has no life vest. This is this flight. My supposition is, my example, information is this flight has no life vest.
Which flight?
No, some flights the pilot would say there is no life vest here because we don't need, right?
Yeah.
Because the airplane is very safe already.
Yeah.
Is this a better idea or not?
No, I mean, we were thinking about an experiment, where we have a plane with life vest and a plane without life vest, and on two different routes. And one route is going over the sea, transatlantic, and the other one is not crossing the sea. Just a land flight. So we are sure that the people will request a life jacket regardless whether the flight goes over the sea or over the land. They don't think about it.
It's more about the symbol.
It's a symbol.
Não é uma questão de racionalidade a segurança perceptível. Então, o Life Vest ele traz uma questão simbólica que talvez tenha um impacto maior do que o conhecimento que o avião não está passando pelo mar.
I mean, think about when you go in an airplane, you always have this security ballet, when they like this and,
Probably my question is not so clear.
This has to do something with a symbol introducing or suggesting safety.
O que eu gostaria de saber, Dr. Cláudio, é que, com a experiência que ele tem na análise da segurança percebida, se ele considera que numa condição a pessoa aceitaria trocar um símbolo de segurança percebida, que é o life vest, por um relatório técnico.
So, a passenger accept the exchange the symbol of the perceived safety, which is the life vest, for a technical report of the safety.
Yeah.
Would a passenger prefer a technical report of the safety of the plane, or would prefer the life vest?
It's really difficult to answer this question because it needs an experiment. But I can tell you an experiment of a Nobel Prize winner, Kahneman and Tversky. You probably have heard about them. They got a Nobel Prize, and they did a very simple experiment. They asked people, what do you prefer? What do you prefer? To get 1,000 reais on your hands directly, or you get 2,500 reais with a chance that 50% chance that you lose everything. What do you think? What people prefer? 1,000 cash on your hands.
Okay, and the
or
other option?
2,500, but with the chance that of 50% that everything is lost.
I prefer the 2,000 in my hand.
Yeah, because he is an evidence-based person. But you know, the result was that most people don't think in terms of evidence-based medicine, and they conclude, what I have, that I have. So give me the 1,000 reais, you know.
Eu acho que o exemplo que ele usou é mais para dizer que a mente nossa não é tão racional, né? E muitas vezes é mais dirigida pela intuição do que talvez o Life Vest gere mais essa sensação de intuição que Kahneman fala, do que a intuição do Life Vest gere mais a sensação de segurança perceptível do que a racionalidade que o engenheiro iria procurar, né? É o que eu senti da resposta dele. É muito mais pelo simbólico, pelo emocional, do que pelo cálculo da probabilidade de risco.
Ok, mas eu vou levar isso em consideração na relação que existe o médico com o equipamento, com essa percepção. Se troca o relatório técnico por uma etiqueta.
O quê?
Porque se troca um relatório técnico por uma etiqueta do equipamento. Então, o Life Vest...
Qual é a sua opinião em relação à sua pergunta?
Não, o relatório não é importante.
Yeah, okay.
O importante é o Life Vest conectado lá no equipamento.
So that's his opinion as an engineering in the hospital. More important than the report to the physician is like a label. You know, the label, a small label, has a greater impact of safety than a complete report. So he has the same sense.
So, I realize that you are an engineer. I think for the hospital manager, it is very important that the patients feel safe in this hospital, because when they feel safe, they will come back to this hospital, or they will recommend. So I would strictly suggest to do an experiment in your hospital where you put on a label on one ward, and on a different ward you just give the information, and then you will see whether the label or the information is better, and it may be absolutely worth the money, you know, to do this little experiment.
So we have a good idea to do a research project here, you know, to compare these two ways of generating. And how would we measure in a research project the perceived safety?
Yeah, you know, this is a secret I have to discuss. I can tell you. No, I'm telling you. You know, you cannot ask, do you feel safe? This will give you no reliable result. You have to see what is the reaction of the patient following this information. And on the reaction, you will see whether the patient feels safe or not.
Então, Jorge trouxe essa questão. A sensação de Jorge como engenheiro é que como é que você falou? Um label, uma etiqueta dá mais sensação de segurança do que um completo relatório técnico. E Franz sugeriu, a gente podia fazer um estudo aqui, né? Comparando essas duas estratégias e avaliar o que gera mais segurança perceptível. Eu acho que isso é, inclusive, um dos campos de ciência. Já que a gente está chegando à conclusão de segurança perceptível é importante, e importante não só para o bem-estar do paciente, qualidade de vida, mas talvez até influenciando desfechos, que isso seja também um motivo de pesquisa, associado ao pessoal da psicologia, etc. So
Luis.
Don't worry with the time, because I'm changing the whole program here in my mind.
Luis.
You know, this happens the first time to me when I'm in Brazil, that somebody changes the program.
Eu estou mudando o programa o tempo todo porque a discussão está tão boa que eu já estou deletando algumas palestras minhas aqui. Márcio is infectologist.
Professor, eu queria fazer uma pergunta. O senhor falou da capacidade individual, habilidade do profissional de saúde em tentar entender o que o paciente deseja ouvir. Como conseguiríamos medir essa habilidade individual de cada pessoa e como tornar isso ensinável à população em geral para que possa ser reproduzível?
Como ensinar aos profissionais de saúde.
A ter essa capacidade de percepção do que cada paciente quer saber para se sentir seguro.
So how can we teach health professionals to develop this perception of how much the patient wants to know about their disease and prognosis?
Yeah.
How to teach this?
Yeah, you know, you are asking me so difficult questions. I cannot answer, to be honest, I cannot answer the question, because if I give you an answer, it's not very well supported by evidence. So I have an idea what we can do, and we can train. We just start to write down, and then we have a small group who evaluates this. You know, and then we talk to the nurses, because the nurses know very well what's going on the ward. You know, and they tell, you know, this remark at the end of the anamnesis made by one of the doctors is completely wrong in this situation, but in the other situation it was correct. So I think this would be my recommendation, but it's not based on evidence. It's not based on...
So Ana Verena, she is the head of infectology, and also she is the medical manager of the hospital.
Yeah.
She has a question.
Obrigada, Dr. Franz. Em qualidade percebida, nós temos alguns instrumentos de mensuração. Em segurança percebida, além da comunicação, existe alguma forma de avaliar o quanto o paciente está satisfeito, além da comunicação?
So she mentions that there are some instruments to measure perceived quality, but she doesn't know any instrument that measure perceived safety in a hospital. Yeah. For example, you can measure here and say and conclude that our hospital is very good in making perceived safety to their patients. Is there a way to measure it as an institution?
Yeah, definitely. You know, so I would be glad, you know, if you request how to teach a group to develop an instrument. This development of the instrument will take about 1 year, I promise you. So I warn you, it's a horrible amount of work to develop an instrument. And when you want to develop a different, and you have to be careful, when you develop an instrument, let's say for the surgical outpatient clinic, then you can expect there are other factors which influence the perceived safety than in a radiology department. You know, when you go to a radiology department, patient gets different types of information, and this makes it so difficult. You know, you had to develop a specific instrument for the surgical outpatient clinic, for the internal medicine, for the radiology, and so on and so on. So, you know, maybe we should first discuss if we can change the policy a little bit and make it easier than to develop specific instruments, each of them requiring 1 year of work. It's too much.
It has to be customized for each also hospital and for each sector of the hospital.
Exactly.
Because
so,
different sectors, people have different values, right? Different
this is one of the big problems we are working on right now, but I do not have the solution.
Então a resposta dele para a Ana é que na realidade isso demora algum tempo, porque a gente tem que desenvolver um instrumento para cada hospital ou talvez um instrumento para cada setor. O setor de hemodiálise deve ser dependente de outras variáveis de segurança perceptiva do que o setor de radiologia ou o setor de cardiologia. Então ele comenta que é um trabalho que tem que ser feito, né? Comenta até de um curso que ele tem de ensinar como fazer isso, e que isso demora algum tempo, né, para desenvolver um instrumento específico para o seu lugar, mas definitivamente tem forma de fazer isso e de desenvolver isso para medir a segurança perceptível.
E instrumentos para usar, porque eu vejo que a visual, eu vejo isso na diálise, né? Estou aplicando para mim. Na diálise, manuais, folhetos, mas quando você usa a informação visual, talvez voltando ali a Jorge, a informação visual na experiência dele, se isso corresponde ao que eu penso.
Acho que isso tem a ver com o primeiro exemplo que ele deu do colete salva-vida, que coisas
Lá
desse
fora.
tipo geram muito mais segurança perceptiva do que a explicação ou a racionalização. So she understands. She was happy with your answer about a tool to measure, but then she asked, and what are the tools to promote perceived safety?
Yeah, right. I had the impression that you suggest, to have different faces.
Visual.
To visualize the scale. This does not work because you have to identify the factors which increase the safety or which decrease the safety. And this is the complicated story, to find all these factors and to quantify it. So when you just ask, do you feel safe, like a thermometer, 100% is absolutely safe, 0 is absolutely non-safe. This doesn't help you a lot. So you have to know exactly what are the parameters. And this makes it so difficult because these parameters are different in the on the infectious ward or in the radiology department. We measured perceived safety in coal miners, in the North Pole.
Minas de carvão, né? Okay. Jacqueline there, she's the head of quality and safety of the hospital. Probably she has an important question.
Ok, tudo bom? Então, eu queria ouvir um pouquinho quais são as estratégias, né, que ele tem visto de desdobramento dessa comunicação, dessa percepção, né, de segurança dentro da instituição, considerando, né, o desdobramento da alta até a operação e entre as categorias profissionais, né? Quais são as estratégias que ele tem visto, que tem desenvolvido para garantir essa percepção?
Seria semelhante à pergunta de Márcia, quais são as estratégias de desenvolver a segurança perceptiva?
De desdobramento para a gente viabilizar, transmitir a comunicação entre o desdobramento da instituição.
O que é desdobramento, para eu entender? Desdobramento?
Entre a alta gestão, a gerência, da gerência, a supervisão, da supervisão, a operação, de forma de que quem está lá na ponta possa estar transmitindo isso. Capilarização.
Ok. Veja se vai estar certa a minha pergunta. You have the managers of the hospital that they may have the perception of how important it is. How to make, the people who are dealing directly with the patients, how to capillarize this to people who are directly with the patients, how to communicate from the managers to the nurses and physicians, everybody, the importance of this. How the managers can pass this message to everybody that it is important. Because here we may have a few people who are managing like quality and safety. She may have this opinion clear to her, but how can she communicate and teach the importance of this to everybody in the hospital?
Yeah, but I think it's simple. So imagine your colleagues are here in this room and they listen to the discussion. I think even the not medical trained or well-trained people will exactly understand what the problem is. And they understand the principle of perceived safety. And they understand that some patients are quite anxious and other patients feel very safe. So I think the communication, this principle to different colleagues is not a real problem. You just have to tell them. I have the impression. Should we tell them that I will be back?
Let's. Eu acho que foi interessante. Ele disse que quem está lidando com o paciente tem a exata noção de como isso é importante no dia a dia. Então pode ser tanto uma coisa dos managers para os assistenciais como o contrário. Okay, Franz, have a seat there.
Thank you. I have to tell you what. In November this year, I will come back to Bahia. But you know, I have already so many jobs. So talk to him. He has to fix my calendar. And I think we should reserve one afternoon to tell you how to assess, how to measure perceived safety in a hospital.
Okay. Let's put this in our schedule for November. Have a seat there. Because I want you to, interact with this thing. Então, eu vou fazer essa apresentação aqui sobre a... Oh, okay, Vanessa.
Bom dia.
Last question, okay? Vanessa, she's the head of Human Resources in the hospital.
Good morning. Complementando a fala de Dr. Márcio, né, quando ele diz de como ensinar, né, a equipe a ter esse cuidado, né? Então, queria escutar um pouco. Ele falou um pouco, mas na minha percepção, quanto mais a gente tiver o autoconhecimento, né, e mais a gente, junto com o paciente, ver e ouvir além, né, muitas vezes a gente quer seguir protocolos e cumprir padrões muito rapidamente, né, como uma produção. E, na verdade, a partir do momento que os profissionais buscarem maior, né, autoconhecimento e ver e ouvir mais, eu entendo que isso muda, né? Então, essa experiência do paciente, essa
mais
percepção...
uma mudança cultural do que um protocolo, né?
Mas que parte do indivíduo, né, que vai estar...
De dentro para fora.
Exatamente. Então, eu queria que ele falasse um pouquinho como ele tem visto, né, esse trabalho da pessoa, né, como eu posso me transformar para fazer um melhor atendimento, né, e gerar essa percepção, né, de segurança e de acolhimento, na verdade.
She's giving her opinion that it's more something, this work on perceived safety, it's not a protocol work, it's more something from inside out. That the person has to become interested in that, think about that. So it's more like a cultural change than let's develop a protocol, a strict protocol. Everybody will emulate this protocol with every patient. It's more like the person has to change. The culture in the hospital has to change towards this.
Absolutely agree.
Boa opinião. Foi mais uma... Ok. Então, eu vou fazer essa apresentação aqui, isso que é uma coisa muito importante que eu tenho trabalhado com o Franz. Depois a gente vai ter um coffee break, e aí a gente volta que ele vai falar de economia clínica e de nurse, só para vocês terem uma perspectiva de roteiro que eu acabei de refazer aqui. Acabei de deletar uma palestra minha, mas as minhas eram menos importantes. Pode. Ok. He has already a question about my presentation that I haven't started yet.
Então é o seguinte, você vai entender por que eu estou provocando assim, antes de você começar. Eu percebo que essas duas palavras aí, e mais uma terceira palavra, que é eficiência, na administração e na saúde, elas são colocadas de forma um pouco diferente. Então, vou dizer assim, como eu entendo no mundo da administração. Eficiência é você fazer bem feito. Fazer enxuto, fazer bem feito, fazer rápido. Eficácia é você fazer certo. E ser efetivo é você ter eficiência e eficácia. Vou dar um exemplo. Meu amigo Vinícius está aqui atrás. Cadê ele? Foi embora. Vou imaginar que alguém esteja com dor de garganta. Então, vou ser bem eficiente. Vou pegar uma espada e vou cortar o pescoço dela. Fui extremamente eficiente. Super rápido, ela nem viu. Mas eu não fui eficaz.
Foi ótimo que você falou, porque é totalmente diferente em medicina, as definições.
Você está usando efetividade, né?
Das palavras. Totalmente. Aqui eu falei eficácia e efetividade, ainda tem eficiência, que Franz vai falar quando ele falar de economia clínica.
Então, você entende que eficiência mais eficácia é igual a efetividade?
Não.
Não?
Não.
Na administração é assim.
Então, a gente parte de um ponto de já deixar claro que é totalmente diferente da linguagem administrativa. Essa linguagem de epidemiologia, é uma linguagem epidemiológica. Vem da epidemiologia clínica, e a gente pode dizer também que é medicina baseada em evidência. Mas, então, vocês vão ver que como isso é diferente. Mas a gente tem que pensar e tem que diferenciar bem o que é eficácia e efetividade, e, na seguinte, ele ainda entra em eficiência. Ok? Então, eu venho trabalhando muito com o Franz nessa questão aqui, quando a gente fala de medicina baseada em evidências, né? Se eu vou falar, por exemplo, de tratamento, de uma conduta terapêutica, a gente quer que aquela conduta terapêutica seja eficaz. E a eficácia é testada no mundo dos ensaios clínicos randomizados, né? Você faz um ensaio clínico randomizado, que é um laboratório controlado em relação a eventuais vieses que podem gerar conclusões erradas, e você chega a uma conclusão de que um tratamento funciona, traz benefício. Isso é eficácia. Portanto, a eficácia é a prova do conceito num experimento científico, que é o ensaio clínico randomizado, né? Daí vem o conceito de efetividade. Aqui eu demonstrei eficácia, que é um conceito tirado do trabalho. Efetividade é o seguinte: quando eu vou para o mundo real, eu saio do artigo científico, isso que está demonstrado no artigo, que é um experimento feito para demonstrar aquele conceito, vai se reproduzir, vai acontecer realmente no mundo real. Então é muito importante que a gente pense na tradução da evidência científica para o mundo real. E, normalmente, em medicina baseada em evidências, se fala muito de eficácia, de ensaio clínico randomizado, como se fosse só isso. Mas a gente tem que pensar também em efetividade. Então, eficácia é a demonstração do conceito no mundo ideal. E efetividade é quando esse conceito é reproduzido no mundo real, com o seu paciente, no seu hospital, na sua unidade. E existem motivos para a gente perceber que nem tudo que é eficaz vai ser efetivo no mundo real. Eficácia é uma informação científica. Efetividade é que você consegue reproduzir aquilo no seu paciente. Tem coisas que você demonstra o conceito, mas quando você chega no mundo real, existem obstáculos que fazem com que você não consiga reproduzir aquilo. E tem coisas que, eu vou mostrar exemplos aqui, situações que a efetividade pode ser até melhor que a eficácia. Ou seja, o mundo real oferece condições até mais favoráveis para o paciente do que o mundo ideal do ensaio clínico. Essa é a diferença. Você está curioso para eficiência. Eficiência é custo-efetividade. Mas não necessariamente apenas o custo monetário. Eu posso pegar um carro, sair daqui e chegar em minha casa, só que se eu tiver um carro que economiza menos gasolina, eu vou fazer o mesmo, ser tão efetivo quanto chegando na minha casa, porém gastando menos. Então, eficiência é a ideia de custo-efetividade, mas o custo não é só o monetário, é o custo do sofrimento do paciente, do evento adverso do paciente. Então, eu consigo o mesmo resultado com menos sofrimento, com menos custo, com menos dinheiro gasto, etc. Isso é eficiência. Então, a eficiência realmente é o nível maior de desempenho de uma determinada conduta. Mas o que a gente tem que enfatizar que a eficácia, o que a gente lê no artigo, não significa que vai funcionar no mundo real. Portanto, a gente tem que testar isso também no mundo real. Há razões para a efetividade ser menor do que a eficácia, e há razões, em determinadas situações, a efetividade pode ser até melhor do que a eficácia, e eu vou demonstrar essas situações, porque a gente já pode refletir. Eu leio um artigo, essa droga é benéfica, vou fazer ou não no meu paciente? Pense se você vai ter algum problema de efetividade. Pense se você está preparado para aplicar aquele conceito. Então, em situações complexas, onde há complexidade daquela conduta, você tende a ter uma eficácia menor do que a efetividade. Você vai perder desempenho. Por exemplo, uma cirurgia nova, complexa de ser realizada, uma cirurgia cardíaca, onde no mundo ideal do ensaio clínico randomizado a gente mostra eficácia. Quando eu vou para o mundo real, o meu cirurgião não está tão treinado quanto aquele cirurgião lá do centro que inventou a cirurgia. E pode dar tudo errado. Então, eu sei daquele artigo, daquele ensaio clínico, que a cirurgia funciona. Isso é o conceito comprovado, inquestionável. Porém, quando eu vou no mundo real, eu não estou preparado para aplicar aquilo. Então, em situações que envolvem complexidade, ou seja, não é um simples comprimido que o paciente vai tomar. É uma coisa complexa que eu vou fazer. É um procedimento, ou eu preciso de uma estrutura hospitalar e várias pessoas envolvidas para fazer. Você tende a ter uma efetividade menor do que a eficácia. Então, é importante que, quando isso entre na prática clínica, a gente esteja medindo, mensurando isso. Não agora com ensaio clínico randomizado, mas observando o resultado para a gente ter essa sensação que isso aí são os estudos de efetividade, se aquilo ali realmente funciona no mundo real. Aí são estudos observacionais. Então, é sempre importante, Frei sempre enfatiza isso, a gente pensar, it's always important to think about effectiveness, not only efficacy. That's what I'm talking about. Okay? Well, só que existe uma coisa muito interessante. A gente sabe que a eficácia é testada com ensaio clínico randomizado. Então, eu quero testar, digamos que eu quero comparar dois tratamentos. A escolha num ensaio clínico é o sorteio. Se o paciente vai receber o tratamento A ou o tratamento B, é o sorteio. Todos sabem a técnica de randomização para fazer com que você tenha ali 2 grupos iguais e não tenha efeitos de confusão. Ok? Isso é o mundo ideal do ensaio clínico, a eficácia, a escolha do tratamento é um sorteio, é randômica. Na efetividade, no mundo real, no estudo de efetividade, a escolha não é um dado que eu estou jogando, é uma escolha de alguém que está pensando, seja o médico, seja a opinião do paciente ou a interação entre os dois. Então, quando a gente tem situações de trade-off, risco-benefício, onde eu vou adotar uma estratégia que estou pensando no benefício dela, mas eu tenho um preço a pagar, tenho um risco, essas situações, talvez, a efetividade possa ser até maior que a eficácia. Por quê? Porque aqui eu tenho um médico pensando. Ele está ponderando, olha, esse paciente é de muito risco cirúrgico, eu não vou sortear se ele vai ou não para a cirurgia. Eu vou pegar os pacientes de mais risco e não vou operar, e vou operar os pacientes de menos risco, e vou ponderar isso com a necessidade real do paciente operar, baseado na complexidade da doença dele. Então, na situação que a gente tem trade-off, essa palavra trade-off é quando a gente tem que equilibrar o benefício e o malefício, é possível que um bom médico pensante tome uma decisão melhor do que o sorteio do ensaio clínico randomizado. Então, nessa situação, quando você vê que algo é eficaz, você pode até perceber que quando eu vou para o mundo real, isso pode ser até mais efetivo. Porque eu vou tomar uma decisão baseada na informação científica de eficácia, porém, eu vou individualizar essa decisão. Eu estou apenas sendo norteado, e isso talvez seja melhor do que o mero sorteio. Então, o ensaio clínico randomizado, que é tido tradicionalmente como um padrão ouro na demonstração do desempenho de um tratamento, não é suficiente. É importante que a gente observe isso no mundo real para ver situações que a efetividade vai ser menor e também para ver situações onde o pensamento do médico é importante, o quanto a decisão individualizada vai favorecer o desempenho do tratamento. So I'm saying that usually people think efficacy as the gold standard, but it's not enough. It can't be seen alone. Effectiveness is as important as efficacy and maybe more important for an individual decision. And I explain here that in the process of effectiveness, you have a physician thinking along with his patient. So it may be better than just a random choice. What's your opinion?
I mean, we have to think one step further. And, you know, in Germany, and it's probably the same in Brazil, there is a law that no drug and no intervention will be approved unless you have demonstrated efficacy. You have demonstrated that this works under ideal study conditions. Now think 20 or 50 years further on. We now may ask the question, we are not interested if this works under ideal study condition, I want to know, will my patient benefit from this intervention? You know, it may well work under ideal study condition, but I will use it in my practice only if this works under ideal study condition. And this is a real challenge.
É difícil avaliar a efetividade, mas a gente tem que se acostumar a avaliar. Eu acho que foi muito feliz você já me perguntar isso, porque esses conceitos seus de eficácia, efetividade e eficiência provavelmente são muito importantes, os seus conceitos, quando você está lá, digamos, num planejamento administrativo do hospital. Mas vocês da parte gerencial têm que ter uma noção importante do que é eficácia, efetividade e eficiência médica, porque vocês estão trabalhando num hospital. Então, é muito importante que esse conceito, da forma como é tratado clinicamente e epidemiologicamente, esteja também presente na mente não só dos profissionais de saúde, como de pessoas como você. E o profissional de saúde, a gente, médico, etc., a gente pensa basicamente em efetividade, em eficácia. Isso está demonstrado no ensaio clínico. É a caricatura da medicina baseada em evidência. Se alguma coisa está no ensaio clínico, eu vou copiar isso para o meu paciente obrigatoriamente. A gente tem que identificar situações que possivelmente você não está preparado ainda, porque não vai ter efetividade. Outras situações que talvez você deva não copiar, mas individualizar o tratamento, sendo norteado pelo conceito de eficácia. Talvez a gente seja melhor do que fazendo uma receita de bolo. Outra situação que a efetividade pode ser até melhor do que o tratamento é quando você tem a determinação do paciente, o paciente está, o grau do quanto o paciente está determinado a aderir àquilo. E eu gosto de usar nesse caso aqui o exemplo de dieta, por exemplo, dieta para emagrecer. Certo? Você pode fazer um ensaio clínico randomizado, onde você sorteia as pessoas para fazer ou não dieta, ali por um período pré-determinado de 6 semanas, onde as pessoas estão sendo vigiadas e motivadas por 6 semanas por fazer aquilo, e mostrar que dieta tal reduz peso. Quando você vai para o mundo real, tem paciente que quer fazer dieta, paciente que não quer, tem paciente que acha que esse é o momento, paciente que acha que não é. E essa determinação do paciente com certeza vai influenciar na efetividade. Então, você falar para uma pessoa fazer dieta, se ela está querendo fazer dieta, vai dar muito mais resultado do que você falar, como a gente vive falando enquanto cardiologista, para as pessoas emagrecer, e ninguém emagrece, porque a pessoa não está com essa determinação. Então, veja quando a gente está no mundo ideal do ensaio clínico, está todo mundo sendo vigiado por um curto período de tempo, e você pode conseguir demonstrar o quanto eficaz é a dieta hipocalórica. Mas quando você vai para o mundo real, essa eficácia ela vai ser maior, mais efetiva, se o paciente estiver de acordo com aquilo. Então, o resultado, por exemplo, de uma cirurgia cardíaca, pode variar também com a determinação que o paciente tem em querer fazer aquela cirurgia cardíaca. Ele vai fazer melhor a fisioterapia, ele vai entrar mais positivamente, e o resultado, a efetividade do mundo real vai ser melhor do que a eficácia. Então, quando você faz uma decisão compartilhada, onde você encaminha para a cirurgia os pacientes que estão querendo fazer a cirurgia, você não está sorteando como no ensaio clínico. É possível, então, que a própria determinação do paciente, se ela estiver de acordo com a sua decisão, você vai ser até mais efetivo do que o que foi demonstrado na eficácia. Ou menos efetivo se o paciente não estiver querendo fazer aquilo. Então, no mundo real, existe o pensamento do médico, o raciocínio de um bom médico, que pode ser melhor que o sorteio, e existe a determinação do paciente, que se você conseguir alinhar com a recomendação, uma decisão compartilhada, você pode ser, inclusive, mais efetivo. Então, essa é uma conversa de como a gente pode ser mais efetivo na prática. E ser mais efetivo não é só copiar o quanto o ensaio clínico mostra. So, I just told them that if in the real world, if we use the mind of a physician to think about the trade-off, risk-beneficial ratio. And also, if you use the determination of the patients towards that treatment, if the decision goes in line with the desire of the patient, we can be more effective. So thinking about effectiveness is not only to do a study, it's to think of ways to make this efficacy effective, right? That's what I just told. So, essa é a mensagem que eu tinha a dizer, é que a gente, em medicina baseada em evidência, não pare no ensaio clínico. A gente esteja sempre pensando no mundo real, se a gente está preparado para aplicar aquilo, e como a gente pode fazer em determinadas situações para otimizar essa efetividade. Jaime. Microfone para Jaime. Edna.
Luiz, até que ponto, no ensaio clínico, deve-se tratar das questões da complexidade, do trade-off e da determinação do paciente, de forma que para você ter menos surpresas na efetividade?
No ensaio clínico, é necessário, no ensaio clínico randomizado, que a gente não decida com base no desejo do paciente, nem no desejo do médico. A decisão é um sorteio. Porque se eu tomar... Aqui eu estou no ensaio clínico testando aquele conceito pela primeira vez. E o maior risco é efeito de confusão. Ou seja, eu vou selecionar pessoas, se eu estiver pensando, se não for um sorteio, eu vou selecionar pessoas mais favoráveis para o tratamento, entendeu? E vou artificialmente fazer aquele tratamento parecer melhor do que na realidade ele é. Isso a gente chama de efeito de confusão. O grupo tratado vai ser diferente do grupo não tratado, digamos assim. E essas diferenças que determinam o desfecho e não o tratamento em si. Por isso que, para anular esse efeito de confusão, eu tenho que sortear. Mas aí eu estou me distanciando do mundo real, porque no mundo real existe o pensamento, existe o desejo. Portanto, a gente faria em etapas. Primeiro eu sorteio e mostro aqui o conceito, depois eu vou para a prática clínica e observo o quanto esse conceito está conseguindo ser reprodutível. E a efetividade é também ciência, outcomes research, effectiveness research, é também ciência. Doutor Haroldo. Agora está aberto para perguntas e comentários e eu vou estar também traduzindo para Franz.
Citar um exemplo também que é importante nesses ensaios clínicos, sobretudo quando eles são organizados ou patrocinados por indústria, né? Por exemplo, nós tivemos uma reunião agora recente no Aliança discutindo um ensaio clínico, o CREST. Esse ensaio clínico era o seguinte: comparação de cirurgia de carótida com procedimento endovascular de carótida na prevenção de AVC, não é? Só que no desenho do estudo a indústria escolheu os melhores endoscopistas dos Estados Unidos, treinou esses indivíduos durante vários meses com o dispositivo deles.
E eles não fizeram isso com cirurgiões,
no entanto,
né?
Os cirurgiões não foram bem escolhidos. O critério de escolher os cirurgiões foi inferior. E o Liberato estava lá, inclusive, comentou. Então, quando o Gilson Feitosa me perguntou, Haroldo, qual é a primeira impressão desse estudo? Eu digo, a primeira impressão é que tem um viés logo aí de saída, porque a escolha foi, embora fossem
viés...
randomizados os pacientes, mas o procedimento em si não foi mundo real.
É um viés de desempenho,
não foi mundo real.
Né? Um viés de desempenho, performance bias. Muitas vezes o novo tratamento, que é o endovascular, ele recebe muito mais atenção. A dedicação do protocolo é muito maior ao tratamento novo do que ao tradicional. O tradicional é assim: faça aí como vocês fazem sempre. E o novo eu vou dar toda uma preparação de como fazer da melhor forma possível. Até mesmo porque o novo é uma novidade. E como as pessoas não sabiam fazer, tiveram que ser treinadas. Então, é o típico do viés de desempenho. So, he's asking about conflict of interest in relation to clinical trials that have, organized by the industry. So he's worried about this, industry, randomized clinical trials that can be biased. And he gave an example of a trial that was comparing carotid surgery, endarterectomy of carotid, with the percutaneous. And in the percutaneous arm, the physicians were very well trained to do that procedure in a very good way. And in the surgery arm, nobody was trained. So it might be a performance bias.
Yeah, okay. So it was an open trial. It was not a blinded trial.
Yeah.
Of course, it wasn't open.
Open.
Imagine, you know, I don't have a blackboard here, but I can draw like this and you will understand. Imagine there is a preference for one of the options. 80% of the doctors or 80% of the physicians prefer treatment A, and 20% prefer treatment B. Then you randomize. And you have 80 to 20 here, and you have 80 to 20 here. And then you treat this group with treatment A, and this group with treatment B. You see what's happening? In this group, 80% of the patients who prefer the treatment will get the preferred treatment. And in this group, only 20% of the patients who prefer the treatment will get. So you tell me whether patients or doctors who prefer a treatment will show the better results. It's not described in any textbook so far. But, you know, we are publishing it in many papers in between.
So here, Dr. Haroldo has a concern about the conflict of interest of
It is. So it's extremely difficult. We have to learn how to manage this conflict of interest. And it's not a very easy task.
Ok.
Luiz, continuando nessa linha de conflito de interesse, não é uma contradição das agências reguladoras, seja do FDA, seja da Anvisa, em que você autoriza ou não o uso de uma medicação baseada na eficácia, jamais na efetividade. Se uma medicação ou tratamento é percebido como efetivo pelo usuário, mas não tiver aprovação da eficácia pelas agências reguladoras, ele não é usado.
Mas a gente não tem direito de perceber efetividade sem antes ser comprovada a eficácia. Porque a nossa percepção de efetividade ela é enviesada pelas ilusões do mundo real. Efeito de confusão é a principal. Então, eu não tenho como saber se alguma coisa tem um bom desempenho se eu não fizer um estudo de eficácia. Então, primeiro fazendo o estudo de eficácia e mostrando isso, só depois eu vou procurar acessar a efetividade. Porque acessar a efetividade sem avaliar antes a eficácia é chute. Porque a gente está repleto de vieses, e não só de efeito de confusão, mas de seleção e etc, etc. Então, tem que ir na ordem. Eu provo o conceito, mas não deve ficar só com o conceito. Eu tenho que agora, nesse momento, pensar, esse conceito vai se reproduzir no mundo real?
Sem dúvida, mas essa balança está com o peso meio desequilibrado, porque muitas vezes a gente tem uma dúvida sobre a eficácia e tem uma percepção bastante clara da efetividade, mesmo assim
não seria o contrário?
Não é aprovado.
Não seria o contrário?
Não, tem muitas terapias ou medicamentos em que o paciente e o próprio agente utilizador dessa terapêutica sente que ela é benéfica, mas a ciência não prova. Então, isso é questionado. E muitas
então, isso
vezes
é opinião, né? Eu tenho a percepção de que isso funciona. A gente pode estar errando feio aí.
Eu acho que...
Então, de fato, as agências reguladoras precisam de estudo de eficácia. O que eu acho que pode ser, e aí eu vou também trazer ele para essa discussão, é que depois do estudo de eficácia, você precisa de um estudo de efetividade para aprovar aquela coisa, ou você pode aprovar e depois fazer o estudo de efetividade e reavaliar. Entendeu?
Acho bem interessante esse conceito, assim como o que o Dr. Franz falou, de qual é o racional de eficácia primeiro, efetividade a seguir. Mas isso é sempre uma pergunta que vem, e acho que é isso que Roberto está querendo dizer, nas nossas situações de terapia de exceção ou de salva de terapia. Muitas vezes a gente ainda não tem um estudo de eficácia, a gente tem uma impressão de que pode ser útil, tem uma pressão do paciente ou da própria situação médica. E aí eu queria que você abordasse um pouco como é que a gente manuseia essa balança nas situações de terapia de exceção ou de salva de terapia.
Isso. Ana, Eu deletei por questão do tempo.
Ah, que pena.
Vou rapidamente. She was asking about, she got into the extreme plausibility paradigm. And when should we think that something is effective, even without knowing about efficacy? So, dos princípios que a gente tem desenvolvido e discutido, que é da medicina baseada em evidência, seria o princípio do paraquedas, né? Que a gente tem chamado de princípio da plausibilidade extrema. Em torno de talvez de um quarto de nossas condutas médicas, elas são obviamente benéficas, e a evidência está no óbvio, é algo incontestável, não existe escala de cinza, não haveria um comitê de ética que aceitaria randomizar aquilo para fazer ou não usar paraquedas ou placebo numa situação dessa. O comitê de ética não liberaria, é obviamente benéfico, ok? Então, existe sim situações desse tipo. Você tem um paciente em sangramento profuso, com hemoglobina de 2, vou transfundir esse paciente? É plausibilidade extrema. Mas a hemoglobina de 8 já não é plausibilidade extrema. Eu preciso estar aí com uma incerteza antes da comprovação. Então, a gente tem essas situações onde a gente não deve desejar o ensaio clínico, porque isso já está provado pela natureza. Não é que a gente não esteja baseado em evidência, não. A gente está baseado em evidência, mas não é evidência experimental, porque é tão óbvio que eu não preciso de um experimento. Vou entubar um paciente que está parando de respirar, ok? Não significa que ele vai ter a vida salva, mas entubar em relação à probabilidade de salvar a vida é melhor do que não, ok? Então, essas são situações de plausibilidade extrema que a gente tem que estar raciocinando e usando esse conceito. É resolvível dessa forma. Existem umas variações do princípio da plausibilidade extrema que eu coloquei aqui. Existem situações que não são tão óbvias assim, mas são variações que a gente tem trabalhado nisso, escrevendo esse artigo. Uma situação é um curso clínico inexorável. Um curso clínico indesejado, inexorável. Você tem ali a percepção de que isso aqui não vai melhorar. E você está vendo que é inexorável o desfecho fatal. Ou é inexorável que esse distúrbio neurológico não vai melhorar se eu não fizer alguma coisa. Ok? Então, em algumas situações dessas, a gente tem que ter muita visão crítica em relação a essa variação dos princípios, para a gente não banalizar, ou seja, eu vou fazer tudo em todo mundo que o curso é inexorável, não é bem assim, mas em algumas situações de exceção, a gente age de uma forma heróica, porque a gente não tem nada a perder. Mas a gente tem que considerar a situação daquilo, a gente não tem que ficar dando uma de herói a vida inteira. Então, essa é uma variação da situação. E outra variação é quando o potencial benefício tem, com certeza, um tamanho de efeito muito maior do que o potencial malefício, ok? Eu posso ter uma situação aqui de paralisia facial, certo? Por uma questão viral, onde o rosto de meu paciente está totalmente deformado. Eu não tenho ensaio clínico, nem é plausibilidade extrema de que o uso de corticoide por 5 dias vai melhorar a paralisia facial. Porém, se for benéfico, isso vai ser muito mais benéfico, vai tirar uma sequela de face, do que o malefício do corticoide por 5 dias. Então, nessa situação, eu não estou exatamente com certeza que aquilo funciona como é o paradigma, nem estou falando de que funcionar tem maior probabilidade de que não funcionar, mas se funcionar, a magnitude do benefício será muito maior do que a magnitude do malefício. Então, nessas 3 situações, a do paraquedas, curso inexorável e muita diferença em tamanho de efeito do benefício e do risco, a gente deve, não é pode, a gente deve considerar uma alternativa que não precisa ter ensaio clínico. Isso corresponde, a gente estima, a 25% das condutas. No resto, a gente tem que valorizar a incerteza e esperar a evidência científica, porque a gente pode estar tendo maior probabilidade de trazer malefício do que benefício. Ok? Então, a gente ia justamente falar dos 3 princípios. Esse é um princípio muito importante, porque a medicina baseada na evidência não é uma caricatura de que eu só vou usar o paraquedas se tiver um ensaio clínico randomizado. Muitas situações dentro do centro cirúrgico, eu sei que são situações de plausibilidade extrema. E é óbvio que você tem que pensar aquele vaso ou fazer qualquer coisa ali. Você não precisa ficar angustiado, não tem evidência. A gente só precisa distinguir e tomar muito cuidado para não banalizar o princípio da plausibilidade extrema. Plausibilidade extrema não é alta plausibilidade. Plausibilidade extrema é algo incontestável. Ok? Para a gente não banalizar isso. Mas a gente precisa agora fazer um lanche. A gente vai ter um coffee break, né, de uns 10 minutos aí, onde a gente pode conversar mais pessoalmente com o Franz, etc. Eu vou apresentar alguns colegas a ele também. E a gente volta daqui a 10, 15 minutos. Por favor, voltem, porque a segunda parte é mais interessante que a primeira. Então, a gente tem mais duas falas de Franz. Como eu disse no início, para quem não estava aqui, esses conceitos que ele está trazendo são todos conceitos originais, desenvolvidos por ele. E o que ele vai apresentar aqui nesse momento é o conceito de economia clínica, que é diferente de economia em saúde. Aqui não está falando necessariamente de dinheiro ou de custo-efetividade. O pensamento econômico é o pensamento que vai ponderar o que você dá e o que você vai receber em troca, porque tudo a gente tem um custo, que nem sempre é financeiro. Então ele vai explicar esse conceito de clinical economics para a gente, contando essa história, que tem muito a ver com o pensamento médico baseado em evidências, porque a gente tem que ter evidências do custo e do benefício das coisas que a gente faz. Ok, Franz, please, come up, clinical economics.
Are these people coming in?
Yeah,
or
people are coming.
slowly?
They are kind of lazy after, but you can start. We can't wait all the time.
So we come to the second part, and I promise you it will be increasingly interesting. So this is the second talk, and this is more interesting than the first talk. But the third talk will be even more interesting. Thank you very much. Now, first, before I start, I have a question. Do you know anybody in this hospital who speaks German? Is there anybody who speaks? Yeah? This might be very interesting because I wrote a book. And the book, the German title is Grundlagen der klinischen Ökonomik. In English, Foundations of the Clinical Economics. And I can give you this book, and maybe it's a good idea to make a translation. The book was published 2011, so we need a new edition. And I would do the work together with some people when we make, let's say, an English translation and a Portuguese translation at the same time. This makes sense. And maybe we can find somebody who supports this. And I don't want to make money with that. So we can give it to the hospital or to those who translate this, and they can sell it, maybe worldwide, because I don't know anybody in the world who teaches or offers this way of science or this content of science. So let me talk about the content of clinical economics. And I will start with two basic statements, and then I will introduce you to the family of economic disciplines, and then we talk about the application of clinical economics. The abbreviation is CLINEX. You realize it's a little bit different, the writing from the towel, from the kitchen towel, Kleenex, and the condition of assessment, the objective of assessment. So first, very important basic statements, very important. First, Kleenex is not about money. Kleenex is about values. And these values are seen from the patient's perspective and from the society's perspective. So the patient's perspective is not sufficient. Of course, you have also to consider the society's perspective. But most important is, clinical economics is not about money. Kleenex is based on evidence, And evidence is mostly considered a science, but sometimes a religion. You know, I stole this from Louis. Louis is, that's Louis' sentence, you know, that clinical, sometimes it's a science, evidence-based medicine, but sometimes it's a little bit a religion. So, and we can discuss this, but not here. We don't have enough time. So, then I will introduce the family of economic disciplines. First, what is economy? Then second, what is health economy? And the third one will be, what is the difference between health economy and clinical economics? So first about the terminology. This is a terminology which is always mixed up in Germany, and maybe people mix it up in Brazil as well. Economization, economization is something completely different from commercialization. Economization is derived from a Greek word, oikos, which means house. And economization describes the ability to household, you know, to decide, to make useful, meaningful decisions, what you spend your money for. Commercialization is derived from the Latin word marx, and marx means a marketable good. So a good that can be sold, where you can, which you can use to make profit. So commercialization is the ability to make profit. You see, that's a completely different meaning of these two, and these have to be separated. Next one, there is an interesting guy. His name is Hermann Heinrich Gossen. He was born in 1810 and he lived up to 1858. He was a Prussian economist who elaborated the marginal utility. Who knows what marginal utility is? Do you know? Nobody knows? Do you know what Oktoberfest is? Oh, see, that's much easier. You know, then I will explain you using the Oktoberfest what marginal utility is, and I'm sure you will understand. So, and he wrote the first and the second and the third law, and the first law is the diminishing marginal utility using the example of Oktoberfest. So this is Oktoberfest. You know, this is a typical officer at the Oktoberfest. You know, they have to bring beer. Beer, beer, beer. All the time beer. So, and this is marginal utility. You know, this is here the number of beers you have. First beer, the second beer, the third beer. You know, it's all, each beer is 1 liter. So you have to do a lot of work. And the funny thing is, the first beer will kill most of your thirst. When you have a second beer, you know, the amount of thirst which is killed is much less. And with the third beer, it's even lesser. So now go back to the clinic. You know, I don't want to prepare you for the Oktoberfest, but maybe you can pick up this message for your thinking in hospital. You have your patient. You give the patient the first treatment. You can solve as much as of his problem. When you treat, and then he does not respond any longer to this treatment, so you have to change. Then you change the treatment. Imagine the next treatment costs exactly the same, which is not true in reality, because most of the time it's even more expensive. But you know, you have to consider that the effect of the second treatment, it's much smaller than the effect of the first treatment. And when you go to a third treatment, you see, you are spending a horrible amount of money, and what you get back is almost nothing. So we have to apply this law when we think about our decisions. You know, this is economic decision. It doesn't mean I do want to take away an effective treatment from the patient, but I try to introduce rational thinking.
Franz, I think a good example for this is the moment of discharge in terms of each additional day a patient stays in the hospital. So, for example, patients of myocardial infarction, the first day of admission, the patient experiments a great benefit.
Right.
The second day, if the patient is stable, it's not such a benefit. The third day, maybe there's no benefit anymore of staying in the hospital, and you start to experiment the side effects of a continuous to stay. So, and I think that sometimes we are too conservative in terms of deciding when to discharge a patient. And I have the feeling sometimes, no, let's not discharge to home. Let's discharge one more day. You know, because it's more comfortable for the physicians to give one more day of staying. But actually, you may be in that plateau. You're not giving anything additional, right, in terms of... I think the moment of discharge is a good example of this.
Maybe, you know, if there are some managers here, a manager can think in terms of, I can save a lot of money when I discharge the patient one day earlier. Save the money for the insurance company.
Yeah.
So he may negotiate with the insurance company to help the patient back home, to be reintegrated back home. And the insurance company may pay, let's say, a little bit of money so that it's easier for the patient to be reintegrated at his home.
You're not living in terms of beneficial effect, because you may be in that plateau of each additional day doesn't do anything more. Another example, and we always discuss this, is that one thing is to demonstrate a beneficial effect of a treatment versus no treatment, but usually treatment versus treatment, if there is a superiority, it's a tiny superiority usually. So if I have already a nice treatment, to improve it at some cost, usually it's a small effect size, right? Because you may be in that plateau.
Right. So, to introduce you the economy, I'm using Gregory Mankiw. Gregory Mankiw is a professor of economy at Harvard University, and he has 10 sentences to describe what economy is. And these are so beautiful sentences that I want to introduce at least some of them. The first sentence is, people face trade-offs. So that means people compare things, one action with another action. And the second one is, the cost of something is what you give up to get it. So that means, this is an economic analysis, is you have to consider costs, what you have to give up, and consequences, what you get back. And you have to compare costs and consequences of alternative ways of actions. You can send the patients to surgery, or you can do conservative treatment, or you can send him to radiotherapy. So you have different options. And for each of the options, you have to compare what are the costs and what are the consequences. And this is a complete economic analysis. Cost and consequences does not necessarily mean monetary costs. Think in terms of the patient, what the patient has to give up when you offer him surgical treatment or you offer him conservative treatment. So, rational people think at the margin. This is the Oktoberfest, so we had it already. Rational people think, when I drink another beer, maybe it doesn't help me too much, I may save this money and buy another beer the next day or 1 week later. And then this money, this amount of money, brings me much more value. You see? So this is economic thinking. People respond to incentives. You know, everybody who has children at home knows what incentives are. You know, when you clean up your room, you will get a sweetie. This is an incentive. You know, and then they will run to clean up the room. Usually they hate it, you know, to clean up the room. But when they get the sweetie, then they do it. Believe me, any doctor, any patient, everybody reacts to incentives. It's much better to offer incentives than punishment if you don't do it. You know, so it's a big advantage.
So is there data to show an impression that I have? My question is there evidence about this? That I have an impression that in a trade-off situation, physicians think more about what you're getting back, and patients think more about what they are giving up. So there's a different perspective. We usually don't think that the patient is giving things up in order to get that benefit. We only have in mind the benefit of our action. Do you agree?
Of course. You know, from a doctor's perspective, it's much more natural that you think in terms of what you get back, you know, the advantage. He will live longer. But, you know, is the doctor really sure that the patient lives longer? The doctor has seen in a publication some graphs which demonstrate a significant prolongation of life, but they never think about the costs the patient has to give away.
So we should exercise this way of thinking.
Yeah.
The two sides. It's an exercise, everyday exercise.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But it's not natural. So what's not natural, we have to exercise this.
So what I will
practice.
You know, Luis talked about efficacy and effectiveness. All the data we have right now and the decisions we make about a treatment are based on efficacy data. I promise that the world will change considerably when we measure effectiveness data, when we start to describe what was the real benefit of the patient. And the real benefit of the patient is very easy to measure. You just, you know, we should have my German book, because there it's described. When you see a patient, you describe the objective you have in this particular patient. So this patient has pain in the knee. And you make your investigation, you make your diagnosis, and then you write down in the patient's record, this patient has pain in the knee, and my objective is to enable this patient to go up the second floor to his apartment without pain after a treatment period of, let's say, 2 months. So after 2 months, the patient will be asked, can you go up to your apartment without pain? And the patient will respond very easily, yes, every day, no, it works perfectly, or there are some minor problems, or it's almost impossible, or the problem was solved, but now I suffer from another problem, a new problem. You know, so we have a uniform response sheet for the patient, so it will be very easy to collect very simple, not well differentiated answers, but I promise you, this will help us a lot. So Mankiw goes further on. Trade can make everyone better off. Okay, it's easy to understand. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. We have to think about that. Market is nothing bad. You know, we have to respect the ethical principles. When we respect the ethical principles, I think it's no problem to use the principles of economy. Governments can sometimes improve market outcomes, definitely. This means we have to take care of the contacts with the politicians. Nothing works unless we have the politicians on our side. We have to discuss all our ideas and our projects with the politicians, and we need the support of the politicians. We have to convince them that this makes sense. A country's standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services. Please do not forget, in a hospital is one of the most powerful institutions to provide good services. And this is part of the GNP. That means what a population or a country can produce, a lot of it is produced in a hospital. We just don't realize that, how productive and how important these hospitals are. Next point, difference between health economy and clinical economics. You know, at the universities, the discipline of health economy is much older than clinical economics. Actually, clinical economics does not yet exist anywhere in the world. It does not exist anywhere in the world. And I'm working together with Luis that we can make Salvador and Bahia the first place to establish it. You know, we have a 20-year development phase now. And we collected a lot of data and a lot of experience already, but we have no official, no place where clinical economics is established officially. And for me, it would be a great pleasure, together with Luis, together with your institution, with your hospital, to contribute to establish such a place here in Bahia. So let me give you just a few examples. What is the general goal? The general goal of health economy is comparing costs and consequences of alternative actions. This has usually nothing, or not necessarily something to do with medicine. But when you talk about clinical economics, this means it has to do something with disease, with doctors, with nurses. Demonstrated the added value for individuals and society related to accepted costs. Or what is the primary outcome? The primary outcome here is monetary costs. Primary outcome here is quantity and qualities of life. You know, I'm saying qualities of life because people use always the expression quality of life. And they say, oh, we have to measure quality of life. For me, it's the same when somebody says, oh, we have to measure some laboratory values. It doesn't mean anything. So you have to specify exactly what is the problem of this patient, which part of the quality of life is affected, and which intervention do you want to plan in order to restore this particular part of quality of life. So the assessment, the use, you know, I did many years of my life quality of life research. So the use of a generic instrument to measure quality of life, you know, as a total is absolutely nonsense for this purpose. You know, you are treating the patient to improve one particular aspect of his quality of life. So therefore you should measure this particular aspect and not the rest of the other 1,000 questions concerning quality of life. Then, for instance, you know, what are the tools, the specific tools you have? You have the cost minimization analysis, a cost effectiveness, a cost utility analysis, cost benefit analysis, and an incremental cost effectiveness ratio. Here you have a randomized trial, a pragmatic control trial. I hope everybody knows what a randomized trial is. Almost everybody knows. Is that true? Or is there anybody who does not know what a randomized trial is? No. Is there anybody who knows what a randomized trial is? So, you know, is there anybody who knows what a PCT is? Is there anybody who does not know what a PCT is? You cannot know it because it's just published, you know. So a PCT is a pragmatic controlled trial. A pragmatic controlled trial. This is a trial where you can measure effects without randomization. And I will show you in a second how that works. Of course, sorry. The randomized trial measures efficacy. The randomized trial is an experiment. It's an explanatory study. The pragmatic control trial is not an experiment. It's a descriptive trial. You describe what you see. And it measures effectiveness in contrast to the randomized trial. So we published in 2015 a new tool, the pragmatic controlled trial for assessment of effects without randomization. This new tool opens the possibility to assess a new dimension of outcome data, the real-world effectiveness. You know, and this is really something new. You can measure what is the benefit of what is the effect in the real world to the patient, in contrast to the efficacy data where you measure something under ideal study conditions. So you know, he told me, please give a few references. I gave you a few references. No, you said you don't believe. I told him I have lots of references. He said, unless you show it, I don't believe. So I put some of it. You know, it's the references I wrote between 1993 and 1998. So you know, when you add all the other ones, we have reference. So it's not. Oh, so there are other ones. These are publications. Yeah. Only publications on pragmatic trials. I beg your pardon?
170,000 publications. You had a number there on top.
No, this is not. This is 1917, June the 1st. So it's not the number of publications. No, I mean, I can tell you, I wrote about 500 publications. But, you know, I have very good students who bring me the data. You know, you cannot generate all by yourself these data. You know, my students deserve it. So let me explain you the principle difference between a randomized trial and the pragmatic trial. Usually you have a total population. Imagine the total population is all patients in Salvador who suffer from a heart attack, from a recent heart attack. It's very well defined, the population. So when you do a randomized trial, out of this total population, you take two samples, very small samples, and these samples have pretty much the same average risk. You know, there is one high-risk patient, there is one low-risk, and one intermediate. And they have two intermediate, one low-risk, so it's a little bit of difference. But this happens even in a randomized trial. But the majority of patients are not included in the randomized trial. In a pragmatic trial, the rule is every patient who belongs to the total population has to be evaluated in the pragmatic trial. That's like in your office, you know, when you run let's say a clinic for myocardial infarction, then you cannot exclude any patient. Any patient who has a myocardial infarction will be eligible for this trial, will be eligible for your clinic. That means in a pragmatic controlled trial, you do not have exclusion criteria. No exclusion, only inclusion criteria. So, and then here you randomize and you make sure that you don't compare apples and oranges. This is the big problem, to compare apples and oranges. Because when you compare apples and oranges and one group has a much higher risk to die than the other group, then regardless of the treatment, this group will die earlier. You know, this is the problem. So it's the outcome is mainly related to the risk group. So we have to make sure that the risks are comparable. So we have each patient has to be allocated to a risk group, either low risk or intermediate or high risk. But then comes an interesting aspect. In a pragmatic trial, you can measure more than one endpoint. For instance, the endpoint you want to achieve, survival. A second endpoint is side effects. Will the patient react or show an allergic reaction? This is side effects. And the third question is, how much does it cost? These questions can be answered in a pragmatic controlled trial, but when you answer the question mortality, and you have a patient who has got already a 4-fold coronary bypass. This patient will be at higher risk when you test, for instance, a cancer treatment and you measure mortality. This patient with a coronary bypass will have a higher risk to die in this trial than a patient without coronary bypass. So you have to allocate the risk group to the study question. The same patient has not a higher risk when you ask, will he develop an allergic reaction, unless the patient has asthma, allergic asthma. Then he has to be considered a high-risk patient. So you see what we learned when we developed this, that the allocation to the risk group depends on the question you want to answer. Then comes another interesting aspect, and then I will finish with that. This is, you have to describe the treatment the patient will get, treatment A or treatment B. Now, under real-world conditions, you know, there are not only 2 different treatments, there are 50 or 100 different treatments. And it's impossible to compare all of it. But it is mandatory to consider any patient who enters this trial. Therefore, you have a treatment group which is called anything else or any other treatment. So I got a real bad argument from a British professor, and he said, what do you want with the group, with such a mixed group, any other? I will tell you what I want to do. If I see that A is better than B, and I compare it with this group, any other, and it's not better than any other, then I'm not convinced that I have really a new, good, interesting intervention. Then it's not better than anything else. So, and we may have a problem.
Can I add that statistical conversation we had? So what's the difference of this pragmatic trial from the observational studies that we have in clinical practice? First of all, this one comes after an efficacy randomized clinical trial. And several times we have, before the randomized clinical trial, observational studies trying to suggest efficacy. So it's after. But the most important thing is that usually all these observational trials, they adjust for a propensity score, which is a score that will predict the decision, you know, propensity, the propensity of treatment A or B. You get that model and you adjust for this. So you are adjusting statistically for a very important thing, that is decision, physician's decision, patient decision. So it's not effectiveness trial because you are statistically taking out of the equation the physician's thinking. So, and here the adjustment is not based on the propensity to receive the treatment, but on the risk of the outcome. So we are not adjusting for physician's decision and patient's preferences. So I will speak in Portuguese now. I wanted you to hear that because we have been talking about this. Então, qual é a diferença desse estudo? O estudo observacional é chamado de trial, mas é um estudo observacional, é uma coorte observacional. Então, qual é a diferença? A primeira é que ela vem depois do estudo randomizado. Não é um estudo observacional querendo sugerir eficácia. A gente já sabe a eficácia e eu estou agora depois da coisa já existir na prática, avaliando a efetividade. Mas o principal é que todos esses estudos que a gente vê aí, esses estudos observacionais, que tentam sugerir o desempenho de um tratamento, eles fazem um ajuste estatístico para um score de propensão, que é a propensão do paciente receber o tratamento A ou B. E no momento que a gente faz esse tipo de ajuste, a gente está ajustando ou eliminando artificialmente, estatisticamente, a decisão do médico. E como a gente falou anteriormente, a decisão do médico e do paciente é um componente principal da efetividade. Então, esses estudos observacionais que a gente vê por aí, eles não são pragmatic control trials que avaliam efetividade. Não são verdadeiros estudos de efetividade. Para ser um verdadeiro estudo de efetividade, a gente tem que ajustar não para a propensão de receber o tratamento A ou B, mas sim para o risco do paciente em ter o desfecho. E na hora que ele faz esse ajuste para 3 estratos de risco, você não está eliminando a decisão do médico ou a decisão do paciente. Então, esse sim seriam... This is actually an effectiveness trial, while the other observational studies are not.
Okay. Application to the clinics. The difference between efficacy and effectiveness, you know, we discussed this. I think, and Louis presented this information in his lecture. I think I can skip this. So this is the important trial. You know, remember, screening tests, diagnostic tests, treatment and prevention all were based on efficacy trial because we did not have a method to do an effectiveness trial. So the foundation for all our decisions, for all our guidelines are based on efficacy results. Can you imagine that there will be change, there will be some change in the next decade? Because efficacy and effectiveness are definitely not the same. So I expect a big change. Examples for wrong conclusions, mistake, fraud, crime in healthcare. I will skip this completely in order to be a little bit faster. Is it okay? And I will bring it in November.
So, ele iria dar um monte de exemplo aqui de estudos enviesados e etc., mas eu acho que para que a gente tenha outra discussão e seja produtiva, eu queria, em relação a essa apresentação dele, de economia clínica, abrir a discussão para comentários de vocês. Carol, where is the microphone? Moisés, please. Moisés, por favor, leve ali o microfone para Carol. Achei que Moisés falava inglês, eu já estou... Aliás, ele fala, né? Ele está estudando inglês. Ok, Carol.
Hello?
Carol is a cardiologist and she works in research, clinical research too.
Thank you. Professor, regarding the internal validity and the selection bias in pragmatic clinical trials, it is important for this kind of study or not?
Good question.
So she asked about
internal validity
of these pragmatic control trials.
And selection bias also.
So, you know, it's written in all the textbook that a randomized controlled trial shows very high internal validity. But when you think of the internal validity, the randomization is only one criteria. There are so many other criteria. For instance, when you do the trial and you lose some patients during the trial, you know, this is usually not described, but you have to look it up. You have to analyze very carefully such a trial. And we developed an instrument, if you are interested, it is called Medical Students Can Help to Avoid Expert Errors, you know, and by using this instrument, we could demonstrate that there are many papers in highly ranked international journals. They are completely wrong. So, and I can offer you...
She's actually asking about internal validity of pragmatic control trials.
Yeah, but the pragmatic
control... I would say, I think your question is very interesting because it may come up with, you know, a phrase that while randomized control trials is about internal validity, pragmatic control trials is more about external validity because the concept is already proved in the randomized trial. So now you are more concerned with external validity. So,
yep. But the question was, if I understand you correctly, you're asking about internal validity of a randomized trial versus a pragmatic trial.
pragmatic. She's worried about internal validity of pragmatic. And I'm saying that it's pragmatic is more about external validity.
No. A pragmatic trial takes care, you know, you are allocating, you are dividing the patients into a low risk, intermediate and high risk group. So we have to do the experiment first before we can make the conclusion. You know, the two of us sometimes disagree, sometimes. But we are very honest to you. You know, we don't hide it. We live with that. And
so, okay, I agree that you have methods to improve internal validity, but I still say that the difference of a pragmatic trial is what it brings for about external validity.
Yeah.
You're controlling, but it's not such a good control as randomization, for example.
No.
But now you're not so worried with confusion bias because it's already proven there.
I agree with the second statement. It adds external validity a lot. And a randomized trial has no external validity. And the pragmatic trial has a lot of external validity. But I predict, I have to show, I do not have data, that it has even the same internal validity like a randomized trial. So we have to wait until we do the first trial and then we can decide.
Okay.
Thank you.
Roberto Saponic, the pediatrician again.
Yeah.
Microphone for him.
You think we should continue to use the same level of significance, the P level?
That's a good question. He has the answer.
The answer is, I propose no. Do you agree?
Completely.
You are my friend, you know. But you know, we stop this discussion. It will lead us to a different field. We can discuss it afterwards or in November.
No, you can. I mean, when he says he proposes no,
say it in Portuguese.
Quando ele diz que ele propõe não é o cálculo não existir valor de P. Pelo contrário.
É mudar o valor do P.
Não, o valor de P vai ser até menor. Com a correção de Bonferroni. Porque, na realidade, no ensaio clínico pragmático, você pode testar diferentes desfechos. Eu estou aqui com o ensaio clínico pragmático, eu quero testar a mortalidade, eu quero testar se isso melhora a capacidade funcional, coisas assim. Então, como ele se permite no Pragmatic Trial a testar diferentes desfechos, porque o conceito já está demonstrado antes, ele sugere a correção de Bonferroni, que é pegar o valor de P, dividir pelo número de comparações e você ser mais exigente, na realidade, em relação ao valor de P. Mas quando ele diz que ele propõe não, ele tem uma ideia muito interessante. Primeiro, pergunte se aquele efeito que você está vendo é clinicamente relevante. E só se for clinicamente relevante, calcule o valor de P. Normalmente, tradicionalmente, é o contrário. Eu vou ver se há significância estatística e depois vou me perguntar se aquela significância estatística é relevante clinicamente. Quando ele diz I propose no, primeiro, veja se aquela diferença é relevante clinicamente e só assim se preocupe depois com o caso. So I said that you propose that first check if it's relevant and then look for the p-value. Okay. Haroldo, Dr. Haroldo.
Could you comment the relationship between pragmatic controlled trial and patient multimorbidity, many comorbidities?
The patient has several comorbidities. And in a pragmatic
patient multimorbidity.
How do you deal with correction in a pragmatic trial?
The pragmatic trial is nothing else than a photography of day-to-day clinical practice. Nothing else. So I ask you, how do you deal with a patient with multiple comorbidities? So you think, you know, what is more important for the patient? What do I have respect? Treatment, the first treatment is not the best treatment for this particular patient. This is exactly the consideration you include in a pragmatic trial. And this is the difference to a randomized trial. So you see, doctors will feel much more comfortable with a pragmatic trial, but they cannot do an experiment. A pragmatic trial is not an experiment. It is a descriptive trial. You describe what you see. Okay?
That's right.
Márcio? Oh, well, the other people have to hear you. So
Desculpe.
speak in the microphone.
Professores, quando vocês estratificam por risco intermediário, alto e baixo, se algumas doenças vocês não tiverem uma boa definição do extrato, isso não atrapalharia no...
We just got this question yesterday. So it's the question we got yesterday. When you don't have a good way to define patients as high, moderate, or low risk, how do you deal with this?
So, you know, can I answer this question? You know, this is a very good question, very important question. You know, I come back and give the same answer I gave to him. What are you doing in your day-to-day clinical practice when you cannot differentiate whether she is a high-risk patient or she is a high-risk patient or she is a low-risk patient? What are you doing?
Eu vou responder que nem Luiz fala. Muitas vezes o...
Yeah, okay. When you have some score, then you can do a differentiation.
O que ele está dizendo é quando você não tem score. Na realidade, quando você não tem, é porque é geralmente homogêneo o risco daquele paciente. Se você está diante de uma situação que você não tem como determinar quem é alto, médio ou baixo risco, é porque usualmente naquela situação todo mundo tem mais ou menos o mesmo risco, entendeu? Porque quando você está numa situação que você tem como determinar, existem scores de risco.
Mas não existe uma chance de eu, emotivamente, como você fala, não racionalmente, estratificar o paciente pela minha análise e não respeitar...
Quando ele respondeu a Haroldo assim, vai perguntar ao médico, mas o médico vai passar por um score. Na realidade, não é o chute do médico, entendeu? Então, mas a questão assim que você coloca que é importante, às vezes a gente não tem como. Quando a gente não tem como é porque é algo mais ou menos aleatório, não tem grandes fatores, fatores prognósticos, então é porque aí você trataria aquilo ali como um único grupo.
I'm talking about Charlison score, for instance.
He's talking about, Dr. Haroldo is bringing the concept of prognostic scores. Are they
absolutely right? When you have a prognostic score,
you're going to
take it. Take it. This is the best you can do. But you know, you will confess that there are many situations where we do not have a prognostic score. And this was the situation he was thinking of. You know, then you are lost. You cannot differentiate high risk, intermediate, low risk. You have only one group.
Because when you don't have a prognostic score, it's because you don't have prognostic factors. For example, if the outcome is allergy reaction, there's no prognostic score for that. Just treat the patient as one group.
So you see, this trial makes us thinking. We never were thinking before that all patients belong to the same risk group. We just treat patients. Now, since we have this model, we start to think we should allocate the patient to a high risk, intermediate, and low risk group. And we realize we do not have this data. Agree? Can I go to the next one?
Então agora a última apresentação dele, que é essa ideia do Y nurse. Essa letra Y é porque a gente pronuncia o Y, mas quer significar WHY, ou seja, aquela enfermeira que faz a pergunta ao médico. Por que isso, doutor? Por que você tomou essa decisão? Então ele vai explicar a utilidade disso, que ele hoje usa outro termo. But I'm still defending the Y nurse name.
Yeah, he is a fan of the Y nurse, and I will tell you the difference, you know. So when I was in 2010, it's 7 years ago, I was attending a very good international conference in Salzburg. It's called Salzburg Global Conference. You can find it in the internet. And these are very high-ranked international conferences. And I met there the editor of British Medical Journal. There was the old editor, Professor Smith. He is a professor of communication. And the new editor, this is a very interesting lady. She's a general practitioner and a very excellent epidemiologist. Her name is Fiona Godley. And I met Fiona in this evening, and we had a glass of wine together. And while drinking this wine, I said to Fiona, listen, what we need in our hospital is a Y nurse. And she said, what is a Y nurse? And I said, a Y nurse is a nurse who always asks the doctor, why, doctor, are you doing this? You see the idea? We have somebody who asks critical questions. When you go to your doctor, don't tell him this story, because he may be angry at you. That, you know, the British Medical Journal titled, when they published this, "The Y Nurse, Pain in the Neck or Blessing for the Team?" Question mark. You know, so, and then we were developing this concept of a Y nurse, and I'm saying an excellent hospital needs a Y nurse, because this Y nurse helps the team to make the best of all possible decisions. You know, you have to select the right person. You know, you cannot select a person who is always angry and, you know, complains about everything. You have to have a very intelligent, well-educated, I will show you the requirements for Y nurse. So my boss, I'm working in the Department of Surgery. I'm an old, very old guy. And I was kicked out at the university several years ago because of age. Too much age. So I found a head of a Department of Surgery, and this is a lady. Can you imagine a lady, a Department of General and Visceral Surgery, surrounded only by men? You know, she's a real tough lady. So she recommended to me, don't use the name Y nurse, because doctors should also be able to pick up this position. And Louis is always defending the word Y nurse, because he says, I want to educate nurses to think this way. Any nurse should get this training, at least a basic training. And meanwhile, you know, I agree with him. We should try to set up a training for all nurses. And I want to develop this, if you agree, here in Bahia, here in Salvador, and here at your hospital, São Rafael, if you want. You know, we can think about that. Now, let me show you what the advanced position, you know, this is the patient Y advocate, what this is, and there are very high requirements. You know, don't think that we will require the Y nurse, the beginner, for all of these qualifications, but this is the end stage. Now, applications of clinics to healthcare, general concept, the job description, job profile, job history, job skills, and further information. I will be finished in 10 minutes. This is my hometown. I'm coming from Regensburg. Regensburg is a town in Bavaria. And I selected this picture because it has a very old bridge. This is called the Stony Bridge. It was built in the year 1135 to 1146. And this should show you that we have to bridge efficacy and effectiveness. Sorry. In the literature, you can see there is the efficacy-effectiveness gap. Everybody realizes that efficacy and effectiveness are two different things. And my feeling is we need the nurses to help us to bridge this. So in many hospitals, you have problems sometimes in the doctor-nurse communication, because the nurses are closer to the patient than the doctors are. And the nurses are interested in other topics than the patients. So, for instance, when I ask my doctor colleagues, are you interested in outcomes research? That means to describe what happened with the patients who were treated last week, last month, and last year. Then many doctors will say, this is none of my business. I'm looking forward. I want to develop new treatments. I want to make research. I want to find new approaches. So we have to find a person who is more concerned what happened in the past. And this is outcome research. So my feeling is that female are more interested, more concerned what happened. Was it really good what we did? And men, they just tell you, I'm not interested in this snow of yesterday, so I'm interested in tomorrow. Or nurses may be much more concerned, are we doing the right thing? So you see, you can think about that, and I want to get your contribution, how we distribute the different jobs. And maybe the Y nurse or the nurse is an interesting job which can help us to make medicine more efficient. This is the goal.
So I think that as physicians, we are enthusiastic about the effect of a treatment. We get so enthusiastic with that, the new treatment I'm doing, that we forget the values and preference of the patients. My enthusiasm towards the treatment doesn't take into account the preference of the patient. Then when you get a nurse is not so enthusiastic about treatment A or B. She's more enthusiastic about the patient himself or herself. She's closer to the patient, and maybe I have the sense that a nurse have a better understanding of patients' values and preferences than physicians. Or if we understand patients' preferences, sometimes our preferences value override the patient's preference. That's why I think that a nurse is in a better position to understand the two things. Do you agree?
Agree. Completely. So we had this already, we can skip this. The general concept. Why do we need a patient advocate? I think I gave you the answer. Because we need somebody who supports the patient in case there are different opinions within the team. And this has to be a person who is accepted by both sides, by the nurses as well as by the doctor. Is shared decision-making identical with the consent? No, it is not. Shared decision is something different than a consent. Please think about that. I don't want to go into detail. Is efficiency dependent on patient's value? Of course. The treatment will be more efficient when you meet the patient's values, when the treatment is in accordance with the patient's values, with the patient's expectations, in contrast when you do something which is against the patient's will. Do the patient's preferences express their values? Of course. Preferences, what the patient prefers, is always an expression of the underlying value. You know, the value determines what your preferences are. Will matching the patient values influence the efficiency of hospital care? And this is the interesting thing. Our managers are interested. Will this new dogma, this new paradigm, what we want to introduce, will it affect the efficiency of a hospital? And my answer is yes. It will induce a measurable increase of the efficiency. I have a question. Yeah.
I just got a message from one of my residents, Kyle. He's up there, and he asks, is there a space for Y residents? You know,
Yeah,
Y residents, what do you think?
Definitely, definitely. I think we can do that. So, you know, this will be our task next weekend to think about that, and we will have ideas.
Yeah,
and
it's
then,
a good question.
No,
Good
wait a minute. We request that people who are interested, please contact Luis and tell him we are interested to contribute to develop this concept of a Y nurse or of a patient advocate. And we appreciate very much everybody's contribution because we need your experience.
For being a Y resident, it's not only ask why. Usually you ask why based on evidence. Is there evidence for that? Which is a good thing. But in this concept, the resident should be closer to the patient and understanding more the patients and thinking more about effectiveness than efficacy. Then it would work.
So now we will get more official. So there is an official job description. The title is Patient Y Advocate or Y Nurse, it depends. Location, any major hospital. And I think a hospital like this hospital should have only one patient advocate, you know, because it's a well-paid person. It's at the same level like a director of a department. It has to have she or he has to be a very qualified person, and you know the corresponding personality, so that she or he can complete this job. The person is selected by the board of hospital directors. You know, it's not easy to get this job. There are three responsibilities: the doctor-nurse relationship and the team efficiency. So the responsible for the entire efficiency of a hospital healthcare efficiency, clinics, the education of the personnel in this hospital, and responsible for patient safety and hospital reliability. And now comes the bad news. The salary is fixed only to 50%, and 50% is based on success.
Friends, let me bring that discussion we are having yesterday, and I defended the idea that each department should have a Y nurse, and you defended the idea that there should be one for the whole hospital.
Because I think it is not affordable. It's not affordable. This person has to have a salary which is quite reasonable, a very valuable salary. And you cannot afford such an additional person for each department.
But you will actually save money with this person. So
you know,
maybe
I have a feeling how much you can save in money, you know. Maybe you are right. I do not want to fight about this, but you know, we are presenting our different point of view. So the job profile is, there are several positions. The first is the position of the person who is elected. Then there is a position for a deputy patient advocate. Then there will be one position for a safety fellow and a secretary. But you know, the head of such a department is expected to generate grants for several other co-workers in this department, but this is not provided by the hospital. The person is responsible for service, for research, and for teaching. So, team relationship and efficiency and patient safety, these are services, this person or this department has to provide. Research area is development of projects on hospital healthcare, efficiency, patient safety and hospital liability, fundraising, publication of new PYA developments. Teaching, training courses and seminars.
Yes, now I understand why you propose just one, because it's like a department, right?
It's a department.
Separate department.
This is a tough job. It's a tough job. And I think there are not too many people who can do this. But maybe we can create a position which helps this person to run the job. And then we come together a little bit closer. Next one, job history. I'm finished within 3 slides. Job history. This is a problem, you know, because I found this article, but I cannot read it because it's in Portuguese. But maybe some of you can read it, you know. So there is Luis has got the reference, you know, he has a copy. Everybody who is interested in the copies of my lecture can get the copy from Luis. Next one, another paper, you know, this is published in Spanish, I think. Here it's in Spanish, but there is at least an English abstract. So, and this is an interesting table. I made this. It's not yet published. Please don't use it, don't distribute it. We will write a publication right now. I have 2 other colleagues who do it together with me. We want to describe that the development of the nurse jobs went through different stages. It started with stage 1 when the nurse was an angel. You know, somebody's laughing here. So providing empathy, consolation, basic support. And then came the next stage, the nurse practitioner, fixing real-life requirements. Formal education and specialization is the example. Then came the academic nurse, development, theoretical concepts and evidence-based solutions, scientific development of the profession. Then comes the economic nurse, comparing costs and consequences, adaptation of the requirement of modern medicine. And now we are down to stage 5, patient advocate, formerly called Y nurse, challenging the team's decisions, comparing efforts and outcomes, identification of low-quality services, striving for economy and excellence. Do you believe when you can complete this request, you will be one of the leading hospitals internationally? Job skills, hard skills, education, healthcare professional in medicine or nursing or administration. Experience, 10 years clinical experience. We cannot use a young, unexperienced person for this job. Mandatory specialization, evidence-based medicine or evidence-based nursing, and clinical economics, in addition to the basic education, soft skills, team ability, willingness to learn, communication skills, self-organization, self-confidence, and leadership personality. Mission statement: the availability of a new tool for assessment of real-world effectiveness will trigger a paradigm shift that will cause considerable and positive changes in all healthcare systems. The profession of nursing will also experience a dramatic change, as nurses will be the group within a team of healthcare professionals that will be responsible for the collection of real-world effectiveness data that will be needed for all healthcare decisions. Further information, you can call me about the course. I hope that by November, we plan to start in November. Luis is responsible. I am happy about that. And that was it. Thank you very much.
Algumas perguntas e discussões sobre o conceito do iNurse, que é uma coisa totalmente assim fora da caixa no nosso modo de ver, como as coisas que Franz inventa. Então, está aberta a discussão.
Fernanda, enfermeira.
Yeah, she's a nurse. Can you say your name, o seu nome?
Fernanda, enfermeira.
Fernanda, her name. She's a nurse. Nurse, where are you in the hospital as a nurse?
Sim.
Desculpa, você
Inglês não, português.
Que lugar do hospital mesmo você...
É, unidade 3B, SUS.
Okay, so she works in the wards, you know? Okay.
Bom, eu me identifiquei muito com esse último tópico, né, da enfermeira, porque uns anos atrás eu fiz um curso de extensão de saúde baseado em evidências, aqui do hospital. E fui transferida para um hospital menor do SUS, onde eu tive a oportunidade de fazer um pequeno protocolo de feridas, em que, nesse protocolo, eu trouxe muito da realidade daqui do São Rafael, do Hospital Maior, onde a eficácia do protocolo daqui era muito boa, mas a efetividade no hospital pequeno não era. Aí, o que é que eu fiz? Eu me juntei com as enfermeiras do Hospital Menor e a gente construiu um protocolo que tivesse efetividade para aquela realidade. E a gente sempre perguntava a muitos dos residentes que aqui estavam o tratamento melhor para aquele tipo de ferida. Então, a gente conseguiu muito trazer a saúde baseada em evidências de acordo com o que a gente tinha disponível e de melhor em parceria com os médicos.
Bom. So she's talking about ulcers, you know, patients' ulcers, and she treats this kind of thing. And she
Do you mean decubitus?
Yes. Úlcera de decúbito, né?
Sim.
Yeah.
É lesão por pressão.
Yeah, that's what she means. And she was treating this here, but then she was transferred for a smaller hospital, and she realized that the effectiveness of what she was doing here was not the same in the smaller hospital. So she created another protocol there that became more effective. So it was an example that a nurse was concerned about effectiveness of the real load, and she modified the approach.
You know, this is exactly what we want to support, to help you to make such projects, because everybody will benefit. The patients, the nurses, the doctors, the managers, and the hospital.
Thank you.
And I have a sense that sometimes we physicians, we take a decision, and the nurse has a better ability to see the outcome of our decision.
Of course. You know, the nurses look at the outcome. What is the end of the story, you know? We are concerned, how can we approach the solution?
Yeah.
We are interested to provide a solution. But you know, the doctors, they are not very good in watching the outcomes.
Yeah. Alguém mais? Alessandra is a choreologist. You know her from Baiana.
Yeah.
Eu acho extremamente importante, né, essa opção, né, esse programa, porque na percepção de segurança, né, que foi abordado aqui, é fundamental, assim, tudo começa pela percepção de segurança do profissional e do profissional médico, com os seus adentrando no hospital, apesar do conhecimento, mas assim, levando-se em conta os aspectos emocionais, o equilíbrio emocional, né, em relação a colocar em prática medicina baseada em evidência através de uma efetividade, né? E aí eu fiquei me perguntando como é que a medicina baseada em evidência poderia ajudar esse profissional que às vezes nem sempre está preparado do ponto de vista emocional a tomar as decisões e, de repente, causar um overdiagnóstico, né, um overtratamento. E aí vem essa questão do programa, desse programa, no sentido de ajudar a esses profissionais que, se porventura tiverem dificuldades, né, e hoje realmente a gente tem que analisar o indivíduo, o médico como indivíduo, em todos esses aspectos, né, a realmente colocar em prática e evitar e contribuir, diminuir, atenuar essa questão da segurança, né, da percepção de segurança.
So she's commenting that this program could narrow the gap between, emotional decision and evidence-based decision. Maybe this program may make the decisions less emotional and more rational towards evidence-based decisions.
Or we become more tolerant because different people have different values. You cannot change the values of somebody else, but you can change your tolerance towards the different values. And this will make it easier to cooperate within the team. So I absolutely agree with you.
In our experience, I find it very common for if we physicians decide that the best thing for the patient is surgery, we get kind of angry when the patient doesn't want to do surgery, as if he or she is wrong. So we get emotional about our decision, as you said, and we can't look at the patient's preferences.
May I just mention one example? You know, as a hematologist, you often experience, how do you call these people from Jehovah's?
Testemunha de Jeová, yeah.
You know, Jehovah's people. They do not allow to accept blood from another person, right? So when we have to make the decision and a patient with a Jehovah patient comes with an acute leukemia, we have to ask this question: will you allow to get blood transfusion from a different person? Because as soon as we start chemotherapy, we induce the need to get transfusion. And we are not allowed to harm the patient, to bring the patient in this situation where he or she needs blood. And I experienced several times that these people refused to get blood transfusion. Then you have to be very honest, and you have to tell the patient what the consequence is. Because spontaneous remissions in acute leukemia are extremely seldom. I have seen one, and this was probably a wrong diagnosis. You know, we never know. It was a spontaneous remission. It looked like acute leukemia, confirmed by several hematologists. But my boss said, I will wait with the treatment because the patient is still not at high risk. He had still platelets, he had no infection, he had still white blood cells, granulocytes, enough to survive. And we were waiting from week to week, and all by a sudden, you know, the platelets came back, the granulocytes came back, and the leukemic population disappeared. So we are honest enough to say we really do not know. Was it a real leukemia, or did we make a wrong diagnosis? But you know, to exercise tolerance towards the other, this I think is a very important aspect of this philosophy.
Boscolo is a nutrologist. He is in charge of nutrition of all patients in the hospital, and ICUs, etc.
Nós estamos num hospital cada vez mais especializado, quando cada um na sua especialidade às vezes não conseguem se atualizar ou tomar o conhecimento da especialidade do colega. E eu acho fantástico isso, a gente poder medir a eficácia e também melhorar a comunicação. Eu queria perguntar, Dr. Franz, em relação, do ponto de vista institucional, qual a experiência dele em termos de estratégia para implantação de um fórum de discussão ou de melhorar a eficácia, a eficiência na implantação dos protocolos ou das condutas, do ponto de vista institucional.
He's asking about what is your experience in terms of implementing a more effective hospital, you know, to do what we've done here today in terms of discussing this and make people think about this and make people think about the right choices. Do you think it's difficult to implement in a hospital like this, or it's more of a natural thing?
No, it is very difficult, and I think it depends mainly on the values of the people in the hospital. So I was presenting these ideas to many other places. People just left because they were not interested, you know. They said, this is nonsense what this gentleman is telling us. This does not fit our expectations. And I have the feeling from this discussion in this room that there are many people who think that this idea fits their expectation, fits their value. And therefore, I would predict in this hospital there is a higher chance to implement such an idea than in another hospital.
And I think you are right, because this is a, I don't know if you agree, this is a hospital that is value-based. We are a value-based hospital, because since the foundation, it was based by, you know, values of serving and helping people. You know, Don Luigi that I presented you, his pictures there, he brought these principles of the hospital. So we decided, friends, to give you a present this morning. This is Don Luigi's book, and the values that helped him to make the foundation of this hospital are in this book. The only problem is that it is in Portuguese, so you need to have a translator. But these are the, you know.
No, but you know, I appreciate it. You know, it's not important that it's in Portuguese. I will find somebody who will help me to read the one or the other page. I will not go through the entire book. But believe me, I think it's a great honor to get a copy of this book, you know, because you tell me you like this idea and you express that there is some agreement with the basic feelings and the values of this hospital, of this house, and what I try to offer you.
I think you had the right perception. So we have to thank you very much for coming. I think it was inspiring this morning from what I see in the faces of my colleagues. We're very happy, and you must be back in November for sure.
Thank you very much.
Obrigado a todos.